Chapter 1024. P.S. 1 chapter today, a transitional chapter, 2 chapters tomorrow. Ever since Li Xiaomi obtained the small world, he had been training hard day and night. He had improved a lot and was now in a perfect state. At this point, he had to think about how to take that step. However, ever since he re-established the orthodoxy of Yan Zhongguan, that Mr. Shi was freed and turned into a human. Now, there was no one who could teach him. Fortunately, he'd found a few Taoist books left behind by Taoist Master Shao when he was roaming around the small world. These should be the writings left behind for his 2 disciples. Even though they weren't of the same lineage, after carefully reading them, he was able to figure out some clues from them. He knew that he needed to borrow external objects in order to form his abode, but he was still slightly uncertain about exactly what object he should choose. Now that the mountain gate was just being built, there were troubles from the outside and disturbances from the inside. He needed to calm people down, so he could not stay in seclusion for a long time. Thus, he built an altar on the hill in the small world so that any disciple could see him. At this moment, a disciple came to the bottom of the hill and reported loudly, "Sect Master, someone outside wants to visit you. He claims to be from the north." When Li Xiaomi heard this, he thought that it was someone from Qinsang school. However, after thinking about it, Wei Zihong was also here, so it was impossible that he did not know that someone from the sect was coming. From the north, he vaguely guessed the other party's identity. After thinking for a while, he said, "Invite that person here." Not long after, the disciple came to the door and said to a cultivator in a silver robe and a tall hat, "Sect Master, please come in." The servant who came under Ji Wang's order was looking around. When he heard this, he turned around and thanked him before following him in. After entering the small world and crossing a rainbow bridge, there happened to be quite a few disciples of Yan Zhong Monastery walking back and forth when they saw that there were guests. They all moved aside and took the initiative to greet him. The servant couldn't help but be shocked. He thought that Li Xiaomi was a wild demon. Most of them were rough people. He observed the inner sect disciples' expressions and behavior. If not for most of the people he saw were demons, he would have suspected that he had entered a human cultivator's sect. He thought, in terms of etiquette, the ape and bat tribes under the ancestral court can't compare to this place. This Li Xiaomi is really capable. What he didn't know was that even though Yan Zhaoguan had only established the sect for a short period of time. However, all the etiquette and rules were carried out according to the old rules of Yan Chongguan. This kind of ancient sect had a long history, and the demon division originally did not care about such things. It was not until they were defeated in the battle with the Qinsang school that the demon division began to emulate the Qinsang school. Only then did many of the rules come into being. The two could not be compared. He followed the disciple all the way to the top of the hill. When he saw Li Xiaomi in person, he bowed. He did not hide his identity and said directly, "Yuanjun Palace attendant Sung Jie greets sect leader Li." Li Xiaomi had already expected this. There was not the slightest change in his expression. He only looked at him a few times and said, "So you are an esteemed guest. Forgive me for not being a good host. Please sit down and talk." Attendant Sung saw that after knowing his identity, he was not displeased and did not chase him away. His heart shook and he said that he did not dare. They took their seats in the guest seats. Li Xiaomi said, "Honored guest, do you have any instructions for coming here?" Attendant Sung did not reveal his purpose for coming. He only spoke of words of admiration. He was very eloquent. For a while, he did not stop until he saw that Li Xiaomi seemed to be impatient. He looked to his left and right and said softly, "I have something to report. Can I ask sect leader to dismiss your attendants?" Li Xiaomi waved his sleeve lightly and a layer of light appeared outside the altar. He said, "Fellow Tsang, please speak your mind." Attendant Sung stood up and bowed to the north. He said softly, "Today, I am here under the orders of the king. I would like to invite sect leader Li to serve as the imperial court's master." Li Xiaomi smiled and shook his head. He said, "Thank you for your kindness. I have established my sect to inherit the orthodoxy of my sect. I have no intention of changing my sect. Attendant Sung asked tentatively. According to what I know, sect leader Li is a member of the water tribe. Have you never thought of returning to the right path? Usually, if a demon cultivator practiced Xuanmen's orthodox techniques, it was a taboo to have their roots exposed. However, Li Xiaomi did not mind. He said calmly, "That's right. I was originally a demonic fish in the sea. Although I was lucky to gain spiritual intelligence, if I did not meet the guidance of the masters in my sect, I would still be muddle-headed and ignorant of the heavens and the right path. With the grace of passing down the techniques, I would enter the right path. I would belong to Xianmen and not your northern underworld demon court." Attendant Sung was puzzled. He said, "Sect leader Li, when I came here just now, I saw that half of the disciples in your sect are demons. Obviously, you care about your roots. Why are you not willing to accept His Majesty's good intentions?" Li Xiaomi said, "Esteemed guest, you have misunderstood. I have received orders from my master to expand my sect. No matter where one comes from, as long as one has the heart to pursue Tao, one can enter the sect to cultivate. Before coming to Fengling Ocean, I was in the West Sea. That is a secluded place. No one has ever set foot there. The disciples I accepted are naturally demons." Attendant Sung saw that he could not persuade the other party with words. He knew that this path would not work. He followed his original plan and decided to use benefits to tempt him. He took out a jade box from his sleeve. He opened the box and pushed it in front of Li Xiaomi. He said, "This is what His Majesty ordered me to bring. Please take a look." Li Xiaomi looked down and was moved. He could not look away for a moment. Attendant Sung stated Ji Wang's conditions. He said, "As long as sect leader Li is willing to accept the position and respect His Majesty as your master, this item will belong to sect leader Li." Li Xiaomi closed his eyes and waved his hand. He said, "If there is nothing else, esteemed guest, you may leave." Attendant Sung frowned. He decided to put down his last bargaining chip. He took out the broken horn reluctantly and carefully released a trace of qi. Li Xiaomi's body trembled. He opened his eyes and glanced over. When he saw the item, his heart skipped a beat. It was as if he had an urge to kneel down and kowtow. It was as if he had cultivated to a high level and forcefully suppressed it. He asked in a hoarse voice, "What is this item?" Attendant Sung chuckled. He said, "This was left behind by the dragon god. It was once the trust of the previous demon masters. I believe sect leader Li knows how precious this item is. If you agree to our previous proposal, His Majesty can gift this to you." Li Xiaomi could sense that although this broken horn had been around for tens of thousands of years, it was still alive. He did not know what method the descendants of the demon emperor used to survive until today. According to the records, he had to find an object to entrust himself to in order to enter the Grotto Heaven realm. This broken horn might be able to help him achieve that. This time, he did not refuse immediately. He said in a deep voice, "Esteemed guest, why don't you go and rest? Let me think about it." Attendant Sung immediately stood up. "If sect leader Li has thought it through, you only need to let me know. I will remove the seal on it." Saying so, he bowed and came down from the altar. A receptionist welcomed him to rest in the guest house. As he walked, he was secretly pleased. It seemed that he had convinced this sect leader Li. Once he agreed, he could stay by his side as the demon master's messenger and see if there was a chance to get rid of this person. If he could do it, it would be the best. If not, he could settle for the next best thing and find a way to kill the two disciples of Mount Li. If he succeeded, Li Xiaomi would have to bear the crime of failing to recognize people. If Qinsung's school insisted on protecting him, there would be discord with Mount Li. If he gave up, then Yuxiao school could boldly make a move and get rid of this hidden thorn. The best part was that after the matter was exposed, people would mistakenly think that the North Dark Demon Court was behind it. They wanted Li Xiaomi to submit, so they used this plan. Even if that Daoist Zhang was angry, he would only go find Ji Wang and not find trouble with the Jade Firmament sect. At this time, on the mountain, Li Xiaomi stared at the broken horn. He seemed to be hesitating, but he did not hesitate for long. Go and invite Wei Jinren over. Wei Zihong had been ordered to come here by Zhang Yan, and was currently cultivating in the small world. When he heard that there was an important matter, he immediately rushed over. After sitting down, Li Xiaomi didn't conceal what had just happened, and told him the truth. He then asked, "Fellow Taoist Wei, what do you think I should do?" Wei Zihong picked up the items left behind by the attendant and laughed. "This Ji Wang is also a great person, especially this broken horn, it is even more extraordinary. If I am not wrong, not only is there the Dragon Monarch's blood essence here, there is also a strand of the Dragon Monarch's divine will, it is truly a good item." He put it down. "Such a good thing has been delivered to your doorstep. Fellow Taoist Li must not let it go." Li Xiaomi sighed. "But if you accept this, you will have to accept the demon court's title and worship him as king." Wei Zihong sneered. "It is just a title and an empty position. What can it do? Don't you see that the python and carp tribes have fled to the outer seas, ignoring the demon court? The ape and bat tribes are even more disobedient. They are not afraid of the Ji family taking it seriously. Even if fellow Taoist accepts it, he will not be able to control you." Li Xiaomi said, "These tribes are overseen by the heavenly abode. Naturally, they do not have to care about the demon court. But my cultivation is not strong enough. If there is an ambush, I am afraid I will be controlled." Wei Zihong suddenly said, "Since fellow Taoist Li called me here for a discussion, I believe you have your eyes on this broken horn. Can it help you in your cultivation?" Li Xiaomi nodded. Wei Zihong looked straight at him. "Then please enter this realm quickly. By then, even if they have a plan, what can they do to you?" Li Xiaomi took a deep breath. He wanted to slow down and see if he could find a safer way. But after being forced by Wei Zihong, he knew that there was no way back. Zhang Yan had given him the small world and helped him establish his sect. This favor had to be repaid no matter what. No matter how difficult this matter was, he had to do his best to do it. Thinking up to this point, his expression turned serious and he said, "Okay, I will summon this person and accept his title. However, this matter cannot be leaked out. We need to keep this person in the sect to avoid any trouble." Wei Zihong shook his head. "Of course we cannot let this person go. But this matter may not be hidden. There is no need to do this." Li Xiaomi thought and nodded. "That's right. If the demon court wants to do something, as long as the person is still with me, we can announce it. It really cannot be hidden. But there is one more matter. Should I inform fellow Taoist of Li Mountain sect?" In these days, other than Wei Zihong's help, the disciples of Li Mountain sect had played a major role in stabilizing the situation in Yanzhongguan. Most importantly, there was Jinren Yuling behind them. If they did not say anything about the title, it might cause a misunderstanding. Wei Zihong said indifferently, "Leave this matter to me. Sect Master Li only needs to do your own thing." Chapter 1025. P.S. I underestimated myself a bit. I need to think about the next chapter a bit more. I'll update at night. I have something to do tomorrow night, so I'll be back very late. However, I'll try my best to update a chapter before nightfall. In an unknown place in the blue sky, there was a large boat drifting back and forth in the clear air. If one were to look closely, they would be able to see that the island within was shrouded in clouds and mist. There were countless strange peaks and beautiful valleys. Within this small area, there was an endless amount of scenery. On top of a peak that reached the clouds, there was a kind-looking old man sitting cross-legged. It was the head of the heaven-mending pavilion, Tan Dingxian. His beard was like tassels, and his eyebrows hung down to his cheeks. His hair was tied into a bun. At this moment, he was gazing into the distance. His hands were constantly changing signs as if he was examining the mysteries of the heavens. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps could be heard. The school elder, Bu Jingsu, walked behind him and saw that his brows were filled with worry. His expression was completely different from normal, so he couldn't help but ask, "Head of the school?" Tan Dingxian withdrew his gaze and turned around to look at him. He said, "Yes, it's you. The spiritual energy is clear these days, so it's good for cultivation. Don't waste the time." Bu Jingsu could tell that he had something on his mind. However, this head of the school always did things in a rigid manner. During cultivation, he would never talk about his own matters, so Bu Jingsu knew that he wouldn't be able to get anything out of him. He chose a peak and sat down. He took out a precious pot and placed it in front of his body. After a short while, green smoke came out of it. When it was 3 feet above his head, it was suffused with a faint purple color. Bu Jingsu looked over and began to meditate. Heaven Mending Pavilion's cultivation method was special. With the help of magical treasures, they cultivated every day. They only took in the purest spiritual energy from the spirit points and did not take anything else. After 2 hours of meditating, the two of them sat down one after the other. If it was in the past, Bu Jingsu would have left. However, he felt that his senior had something to say, so he sat down and did not leave. In the silence, the sun slowly descended to the west. Not long after, the setting sun filled the sky and dyed the clouds with fire. Tan Dingxian suddenly sighed and said, "Although the landscape is picturesque, the scenery has not changed. Recently, when I float around the mountain gate, it feels like I'm wrapped in sand. It is not as lively as before." Bu Jingsu unwittingly raised his head and subconsciously glanced towards the north. He quickly shifted his gaze and said in a muffled voice, "Compared to 1,000 years ago, there are a few more people in our generation. The pure air is not enough. Naturally, it would be difficult for us to leave the mountain." The Heaven Mending Pavilion's mountain gate was different from the other sections. They did not have a fixed location, and were all refined within a formation diagram. They floated in the air, and could travel through the sky. Because of this, as long as there was a slight change in the circulation of spiritual vigor, the people in the sect would be able to detect it. The more spiritual opportunities there were, the clearer the air was. It was like a small boat floating on the water, lightly sweeping across. However, if one spiritual opportunity was insufficient, it would be difficult to bear. It would be like a wet garment covering one's body, sluggish and heavy. If the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth disappeared, this formation map would not be able to fly anymore and would fall from the sky. Destroy the mountain gate. Tan Dingxian did not mind Bu Jingsu's evasive words, she only said, "More than 10,000 years ago, heaven and man were not on good terms, so that Shi continent suffered a calamity, its spiritual opportunity was severed. He could only move to the 4 continents under his feet, and only after an intense battle was he able to stabilize this place. However, if this world is similarly corrupted, then we will no longer have a place to stay." Bu Jingsu carefully asked, "Then what is senior apprentice brother's intention?" Tan Dingxian said in a deep voice, "The founding master opened the Heaven Mending Pavilion to allow me to monitor the circulation of qi between heaven and earth, so that yin and yang would not be confused, and the mysteries of heaven would not be stolen. Now that I have seen the inconsistencies, I will set things right." At this point, he said in a serious tone, "Now that the mysterious and demon sects have stopped fighting, there is nothing else to do. I would like to invite the spiritual masters of the various sects to set up an agreement." When the cultivators of the West continent migrated to the East and conquered 4 continents in one fell swoop, a highly respected cultivator suggested that in order to prevent the East continent from repeating the same mistake in the future, the sects should guard the spiritual opportunity of this world and not invade too much. What he meant was to think of a way to limit the number of people who came to the Grotto Heaven. At that time, the Shi continent's cultivators were in internal strife, and then they quelled the demons and demons. After a few battles, it could be said that there were heavy casualties, and in the end, there were only a few people left. Thinking of such a tragic situation, to prevent the younger generation from repeating the same mistakes, they all agreed with this suggestion. There were also a few powerful cultivators who worked together to create an earth virtue formation diagram, and set up a mountain gate for it. It was called Butian, and it was used to monitor the changes in the spiritual opportunity of the world. However, at that time, the cultivators from beyond the heavens had an objection. They thought that the matters of the younger generation should not be decided by the ancestors, so they agreed that every 1,000 years, they could gather to discuss and re-sign the agreement. Bu Jingsu sighed and said, "Nowadays, in the whole world, the Qinsang school seems to be the most powerful. I'm afraid that senior brother's action will seriously offend sect master Qin." Tan Dingxian said in a serious tone, 9 is the extreme number, but the Qinsang school unexpectedly produced 13 Grotto Heaven people, and it seems that their momentum has not stopped yet. If the other sects feel threatened and imitate them, it will only cause the situation to collapse. As the sect master of Butian Pavilion, I will naturally stop their momentum. This is the right path, so what is there to be afraid of? He tilted his head and saw that Bu Jingsu's face was filled with hesitation and fear. He immediately shook his head and said, "Junior brother, why are you acting like this?" When the previous sect master of Qinsang school, Qin Qingang, was also out of line, but didn't he back down under master's methods? Since he could do it, as his disciples, we should also carry on this ambition. Bu Jingsu smiled bitterly in his heart. The situation at the Qinsang school was different from what it was now. In order to conquer the North Underworld Continent's demon division, he had no choice but to borrow treasures from Yu Xiao, and one of Yu Xiao's conditions was for him to sign the agreement. It could be said that he had his weakness, and he had no other choice. However, with the passage of time, the Qinsang school no longer had such concerns. Coincidentally, in the next few hundred years, they were in the midst of a disaster, so it would not be easy to force them to submit. However, he understood this senior brother's character, and knew that once he made up his mind, it would be difficult to dissuade him, so he could only go along with his wishes. He said, "But the Qinsang school is powerful, and they have always been close to the Shaoqing sect. How can we persuade them?" Tan Dingxian said, "It doesn't matter. The Yuxiao school and the Qinsang school have never been on good terms, and they will definitely not be willing to let them grow. If they can stop this trend, they will be happy to see it happen, and the Nether Spring sect will not sit by and watch such a threat. This time, we can pull them in as well." The Nether Spring sect. Bu Jingsu thought about it and nodded. From the standpoint of protecting the stability of the world, there was no need to worry about the battle of the mystical demons. If the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth were to be destroyed, the Nether Spring sect would not be able to escape. As for the 6 demonic sects, they were bound together for good or bad. If they could drag the Nether Spring sect in, it would be equivalent to pulling the other 6 sects over, and this force would be enough to maintain the balance. Tan Dingxian said, "As long as we can rope in these 2 sects, even if the Shaoqing sect really stands on the side of the Qinsang school, we will not be at a disadvantage. If we can persuade the other sects, it will not be difficult to succeed." Bu Jingsu thought about it carefully. This way, there was a possibility of success. Yuanyang sect, Taihao sect, Nanhua sect, and the other sects were not willing to see the big sects become stronger. If that happened, they would not have a chance to stand out. Even if it was not for this reason, they would not oppose it for the sake of the spiritual vigor of heaven and earth. With the Yuxiao sect and the Nether Spring sect taking the lead, and the other small sects waving flags and shouting war cries behind them, even if the Shaoqing sect and the Qinsang sect joined forces, they would still be able to suppress them. He said, "Then the current plan is to ask for the Yuxiao sect's help first, and then persuade the other sects." Tan Dingxian said, "I can go to the Yuxiao school. As for the Nether Spring sect and the other sects, I will have to trouble you to make a trip there." Bu Jingsu was shocked. "Senior brother is the leader of a sect, how can you do it so easily?" "It is better for me to do it." Tan Dingxian shook his head. "Master Lingye is a senior master, he is of a high status. Back then, my master only succeeded because of his influence. Today, I should personally visit him and express my sincerity." Seeing that he had made up his mind, Bu Jingsu could not persuade him anymore and could only agree. After the 2 of them finished their discussion, they used their treasures to conceal their chi dynamic, turned into flying lights, and left. As for the mountain gate, although there was no one guarding it, it was a huge formation, and it roamed in the sky, so there was no need to be afraid of people coveting it. After Bu Jingsu came out, he wanted to immediately go to the Nether Spring sect, but the Black and Demon sects had been fighting for thousands of years, so he instinctively resisted and was unwilling to go there. After thinking about it, he felt that he could visit the Li Mountain sect first. Jinren Yuling was close to the realm of ascension, she was a senior figure, her mana and divine arts were also extremely high, and she once owed the Butian Pavilion a favor. If he could persuade her and borrow her influence, it would be much easier for the other sections. He turned the flying light and went to the Li Mountain sect. A day later, he arrived at the mountain gate, afraid that he would alarm the disciples inside. He did not come down, he only said on the cloud, "Is Jinren Yuling here? Your nephew Bu Jingsu is here to visit." The previous sect master of the Butian Pavilion and Jinren Yuling were of the same generation, and at that time, he was only a little Dao child, so now he considered himself a junior. After calling out a few times, the great formation of the mountain gate opened, and his face relaxed. He waved his horsetail whisk and went down, following the formation door, and landed in a valley filled with flying petals. Looking around, he saw a beautiful and tall woman standing with her hands behind her back in the cloud pavilion to his left. Although she was not dressed up, and there were no servants beside her, she was very dignified. He recognized her as the sect master of the Li Mountain sect, Jinren Yuling. He quickly bowed and said, "Greetings, Jinren." Jinren Yuling said, "Jinren Yuling is a quiet person, you must have something to say to me today, please enter the pavilion to talk." Bu Jingsu hurriedly said that he did not dare, he rose up the strong wind, and entered the cloud pavilion. As usual, he came up to greet a few words, and because he knew that this person did not like to beat around the bush, he stated the purpose of his visit, and said sincerely, "If the spiritual opportunity of the 4 continents is lost, how will the sects continue to exist? Jinren Yuling has cultivated for 3,000 years, your prestige has always been great, I hope that you can stand out and facilitate this discussion on account of the past friendship between our 2 sections." Jinren Yuling listened, and said plainly, "I once owed your master a favor, since you came to my sect to beg, I will not refuse, but you need to understand, the Shaoqing and Qinsang sects are powerful, if the 2 of them work together, they will occupy my Xianmen for almost half a day, it is not something that can be easily moved by a few words, don't count on me too much." Bu Jingsu said happily, "As long as Jinren Yuling is willing to help, my sect is already very grateful, as for the outcome, it will depend on the will of heaven." He still had to persuade the other sects, so it was not good for him to stay, but after sitting for a while, he left. After he left, Jinren Yuling thought for a while, and found a girl who looked very smart, and instructed, "Go to the Fengling Ocean, and when you see your senior apprentice sister Rugia, say this." She opened her mouth and transmitted her voice, the girl listened carefully, and finally bowed, and left the cloud pavilion, riding on a fragrant wind, and flew towards the south. Floating Astronomy. Chapter 1026. Zhang Yan held the letter in his hand and looked at it carefully. He could not help but think. This was a letter sent by Wei Zihong half a day ago. It said that Butian Pavilion wanted to invite all the sects to sign a contract to protect this spiritual opportunity. The source of the news was from a disciple of Li Mountain sect. It was not difficult for him to see that spiritual master Yuling deliberately leaked it to him. The reason why he did not directly pass it on was because he did not want it to be written so that others would not be able to use it against him. This founding master also hinted that in order to return the favor to Butian Pavilion, he would not stand on the side of Qinsang School this time. Zhang Yan did not care about this. Qinsang School and Li Mountain sect had not really formed an alliance. Naturally, they could not count on each other to work for them. Once spiritual master Yuling brought the message, Qinsang School had to accept this favor no matter what. No matter what the outcome of this discussion was, she would not offend either side. This was the survival wisdom of these small sections. There was no need to be too calculative. He looked at the letter again. As the palace lord of Duzhen, he knew a thing or two about protecting spiritual opportunity. After Donghua and the other 4 continents were pacified, the original cultivators of the West continent were also greatly weakened. There were only a few powerful cultivators left. In terms of strength, they could not compare to the cultivators from beyond the heavens. The position of host and guest had already been reversed. Therefore, when the territories were divided, they were also in a weak position. Just like the four major sects of Donghua continent. None of the founding masters were originally natives of the West continent. Instead, they occupied a large area of spiritual land. Although the cultivators of the West continent knew that the situation was irreversible, they were not willing to give up. This proposal came into being under such circumstances. On the surface, it was to stand together and not to change the spiritual opportunity. In reality, it was used to restrict the sects established by the cultivators from beyond the heavens. At that time, the war was over. In order not to start another war, the cultivators from beyond the heavens did not want to push too far, so they took a step back. They agreed to this proposal. At first, Donghua was full of spiritual opportunity. All the sects followed the agreement, and Qinsang school was no exception. However, when the former sect master Qin Qingang came, the sect was flourishing. 12 celestial abode masters came out one after another and ignored Butian Pavilion's urging. However, after deciding on the strategy to pacify the northern underworld continent, they had no choice but to compromise. This time, the tables were turned, and the heaven-mending pavilion saw it as a great victory. Zhang Yan thought about it. Ever since sect master Qin took over, he did not sign the agreement. This situation was similar to last time. It was not hard to tell that Heaven Butian Pavilion wanted to cooperate with the other sections. After that sect master, he said, this matter is not a small. With a flick of his sleeve, he opened the formation door and exited the Duzhan Hall, heading straight for the upper extreme hall. After being informed, he entered the hall and met with the sect leader. I sect and then he. Master, and I said. It must have been difficult for them to endure until now. He instructed the boy below him, go and summon Hall Master Yuntian and Hall Master Daytime Sky. The boy, not long after the two of them sat in the hall, Qi Yuntian and Huxian entered the hall one after another. They came up to greet the sect leader and Zhang Yan before sitting down. Sect Master Qin ordered the letter to be passed down. After the two read it, their expressions turned cold. In terms of the number of celestial abode masters, Qinsang was the leader, so this time, Butian Pavilion was the spearhead. Without a doubt, it was directed at them. Sect Master Qin asked Huxian, what does Palace Master Baikong think? Huxian said decisively, we can't accept this. However, there is a concern. Sect Master Qin said, what is it? Huxian said in a low voice, our Qinsang has 13 celestial abode masters. We are already very powerful. If we reject this proposal, it will be telling the other sects that we want to use our strength to resolve the calamity. They will definitely make a move. If they don't sign the contract this time, they will still do what they want. Although the other sects might not know about it, it was not difficult to see that Qinsang school was accumulating strength for the calamity. So when they go back, whether it was for self-protection or other purposes, they would definitely prepare for the calamity. Zhang Yan smiled, of course, but the sects are controlled by the spirit cave. If they promote the younger generation, it would be a risky move. They might not dare to do it. Qi Yuntian and Huxian nodded. Due to the fact that the devil's ordeal had yet to pass, it was not easy for the sects to maintain the spirit cave. If they had one more disciple to build a cave, they would need to provide more spiritual vigor. They might not be able to maintain it before the human's ordeal. Moreover, those who were in the cave would benefit from it. Most of them would rather sit still than take the risk. Qi Yuntian said, this is not entirely a bad thing. He bowed to the headmaster and said, I think we can take this opportunity to see who is on my side, and who is the enemy of Qinsang. At the same time, in the Duguang mountain of Taihao school, Jinren Shi Huang Yugong welcomed him into the cave. After he sat down, he asked, Brother, have you met Jinren Bu from Butian Pavilion? Huang Yugong chuckled and said, I guessed you invited me here for this matter. Jinren sure said in a deep voice, Chinsang's school does not care about the calamity and the lack of spiritual opportunity. They only want to help their disciples. If this goes on, how can the sect survive? Since we have a righteous cause, I, Taihao, will go to help. What does your school think? Huang Yugong thought to himself, just as the sect leader said, it would be best if I can force the Yutsang sect to lower their heads. If I can't, it won't hurt me at all. If the Yutsang sect wants to cause trouble, they should go to the Jade Firmament sect and the Dark Spring sect. He smiled and said, our sects have always advanced and retreated together. Since your school has agreed, why don't we, Nanhua, join in the fun? In Huanjin Temple, Jinren Pang stood in front of a cave. He did not say a word, as if he was thinking about something. After a long time, a disciple came and said with respect, Jinren Pang, the headmaster invites you in. Taoist Master Pang snapped out of his daze, straightened his robes, and walked into the cave abode. After walking 100 steps, he arrived at the Rainbow Bridge. Looking down, he saw a series of copper pillars connected to a chain, supporting a banner that was at least 300 meters wide. 90% of the flag was the color of colored glaze, and the remaining 10% was a circle of black edges that looked like water stains. On it, there were countless ferocious demons struggling and trying to escape. Whenever they tried to escape, there would be a flash of lightning, and they would cry out in pain and have to return to their original position. This big flag was left behind by Jinren Ru Huang, and it had been placed here for more than 2,000 years. The flag itself was made of precious materials. After Huanjin Temple obtained this item, they wanted to use the thunder technique to wash away the demonic qi on it, and then refine another demon-subduing treasure. She took a few glances, and compared to the last time, the black qi had shed a little more. It seemed that in less than 100 years, it could be truly refined. After crossing the 9 rainbow bridges, he arrived before a crystal jade platform. There were mirrors all around him, and there were at least 1,000 of them, illuminating the entire place. As the multicolored lights flashed back and forth, there were even lightning leaping within them. When the sound of it merged into one, it was distant and oppressive, as if it came from beyond the 9 heavens. On the platform, there was a young Taoist with a weak face. He only had 2 sword-like eyebrows, and his eyes were shining. He sat upright, and his back was as straight as an iron ruler. He was the headmaster of Huanjin Temple, Pu Xiansheng. Jinren Pang walked forward and bowed, I pay my respects to the headmaster. Headmaster Pu said, I am at the critical moment of refining a treasure. If there is nothing important, I don't think junior sister would disturb me. I wonder what happened outside. Jinren Pang said, yesterday, the elder of Butian Pavilion, Bu Jingsu, came to our sect, and invited me to Piji Palace next month to sign the agreement to guard the coffin. Headmaster Pu nodded, I see. He pondered for a moment, and said, this time, Butian Pavilion only wants to stop Chinsang's power. If we follow Butian Pavilion's intention, we will definitely offend Chinsang School. If we don't, we will have to stand with Chinsang School. I see that junior sister is hesitating. Is it because you can't decide which side to go with? Jinren Pang bowed again, and said, I can't hide it from the headmaster. This matter concerns the survival of the sect, and I don't dare to make a decision alone. Headmaster Pu said, I haven't been involved in secular affairs for a long time, so my decision may not be better than yours. However, the reason I choose Chinsang is not because of anything else, but because only Chinsang School dares to stand up and take responsibility when the sky demon is wreaking havoc. Hearing this, Jinren Pang's expression changed. She took a deep breath and was about to speak, but Headmaster Pu stood up and said, Junior sister, please leave. From now on, all the secular affairs of the sect will be decided by you. There is no need to ask me anymore. After saying that, the crystal platform in front of her disappeared under the illumination of thousands of lights. Half a month later, Bu Jingsu came to the mountain gate of Pingdu sect. Looking into the distance, he saw 3 huge mountains that looked like the feet of an elephant, supporting a city made of snow and jade. This place was called the White Cloud Platform, and it was where the main altar of Pingdu sect was located. Pingdu's sect was different from other sections. Because of the hidden Dharma pagoda, the disciples did not need to sit and cultivate. They only needed to invite the Dharma spirit to enter their body, and after refining it, their combat ability would not be weaker than their peers. Therefore, the sect only looked at fate when accepting disciples, and talent and background were secondary. It was also because of this that it had the most disciples among the 16 sects, with millions of people. Most of these disciples were from the surrounding countries, so even the nobles worshipped the mysterious Dharma spirits. For thousands of years, they had constantly built temples and temples. At a glance, there were palaces, carriages, and people at the foot of the mountain. Since the devil's tribulation, such a scene was rarely seen in Donghua continent. Bu Jingsu turned a blind eye to this and floated to the cloud platform. He called out a few times, but after waiting for a long time, no one came out. After calling a few more times, the mountain gate formation opened, and a handsome Taoist came out. It was Pingdu's sect's Dong Tianjinren, Wu Wei. His expression was cold, and he bowed and said, "Greetings, Jinren Bu. Why do you have the time to come to my cloud platform?" Bu Jingsu returned the bow and said, "My sect has recently felt that the spiritual opportunity has changed, and there are signs of instability. According to my calculations, there is a sect that disregarded the big picture and arbitrarily seized the spiritual opportunity for its own benefit. In order to stop the situation, I would like to invite my fellow Taoists to PG Palace to sign the spiritual golden letter." Wu Wei said, "I see. When will it be set?" Bu Jingsu said, "On the 1st of next month." Wu Wei was expressionless. He cupped his hands and said, "I will be there." Bu Jingsu also returned the greeting, and after exchanging a few words, he bid farewell and left. When he reached the middle of the sky, he shook his head. Pingdu's sect did not even bother to invite him in, and it was obvious that they had decided to stand on the side of Qinsang school. However, considering the relationship between the two sects, it was not surprising. He looked at the sky. He had visited all the Xianmen sects, and it was time to go to the Nether Spring sect. Chapter 1027. At the end of the 8th month, Tan Dingxian finally returned from Yuxiao. This trip was considered successful. Even though he did not meet Venerable Lingya in person, he managed to communicate with him using telepathy. Yu Xiao had already agreed to take the lead in pressuring Qinsang school. Returning to the school, he asked in a low voice, "Junior brother Bu still hasn't returned?" The child replied, "He hasn't returned yet." Tan Dingxian furrowed his brows. Even though Bu Jingsu had to go to more places than him, with Butian Pavilion's reputation, it should have been very smooth. Could there have been some unforeseen event? He asked, "Has there been a letter?" The child replied, "Yes, it's all on the table. This disciple doesn't dare to touch it." Tan Dingxian went over and flipped through the letters. She saw that after Bu Jingsu left the sect, he wrote a letter every 3 days, detailing his journey. However, it had been 5 days since he went to the Netherworld Spring sect, and he hadn't written back yet. He couldn't help but frown. Butian Pavilion's position was aloof, and they didn't send many people in the previous battles against the mysterious demons. They only showed that they were on the mysterious gate's side, and they didn't have any deep grudges with Underworld Spring School. Moreover, they sent an envoy, so the other party shouldn't make things difficult for them. After thinking about it, he decided to wait a few more days. Next month would be the meeting, so it was best not to cause any trouble. Even if he suffered a bit and lost some face, as long as it didn't affect the overall situation, it wasn't unbearable. Fortunately, nothing unexpected happened. There were still 2 days before the appointed date, and Bu Jingsu finally returned. Tan Dingxian immediately called him over, and the first thing he asked was, "Junior brother, did you manage to convince Underworld Spring School?" Bu Jingsu replied, "Yes, I did." Tan Dingxian asked again, "Why were you gone for so long?" Bu Jingsu replied, "The 10,000 li Underworld Spring path seemed to have changed a bit since last time, so I was delayed a bit. Underworld Spring School built a 10,000 li Underworld Spring path to the mountain gate to defend against external enemies. It was said to be 10,000 li, but when a cultivator actually reached this place, it would take a lot of time. With the formation door turning and closing, the journey would be many times longer. Even if one's family was familiar with the path, it would still take them a day's time, not to mention the people from the outside. Tan Dingxian asked, "Then why didn't you send a letter to inform me?" Bu Jingsu was also helpless. There seemed to be a lot of resentment in his voice as he said, "The Netherspring sect doesn't allow it." Tan Dingxian nodded and said earnestly, "Junior Marshal brother, as long as it's done, it's fine." "Junior Marshal brother, you must consider the big picture and not hold any grudges." Bu Jingsu lowered his head and said, "Yes, Shixiang." Tan Dingxian nodded and said, "The day after tomorrow will be the day of the appointment. Go and make the arrangements as soon as possible. Don't delay." Bu Jingsu nodded and left. The heaven-mending pavilion's ordinary internal and external affairs were handled by Bu Jingsu. It only took him one day to arrange everything in an orderly manner. After reporting to Tan Dingxian, the two of them brought their disciples to Pai Ji Palace on the same day, and waited for Zhu Zhen to arrive. The night passed quickly and it was the first day of the 9th month. More than 100 strong men stepped forward and pulled the handle. The doors of the hall rumbled open, and 2 rows of children walked out. She swept the jade stairs. At the beginning of the morning, the rising sun illuminated the clouds with warm light, thousands of strands of propitious energy, brilliance surging. Although the palace in the clouds was moving, the golden light was boundless. Even low-level cultivators could see it from afar. Only a moment later, a sword ray suddenly soared into the sky and caught up to the top of the palace in the blink of an eye. It circled in the air and landed on the stairs. It was a 30-year-old Taoist with a mustache. This person's gaze was sharp, and he wore a magic crown on his head and a large crane cloak on his body. Apart from that, he didn't have any other accessories. Bu Jingsu's expression trembled. Shaoqing Chenzi. Although Heaven Mending Pavilion sent a letter to Shaoqing, they didn't pay them a visit. The result was the same as before, it was like a stone sinking into the ocean, there was no reply. Moreover, this sect had always ignored such matters, so he didn't expect that they would really send someone over this time. He thought to himself, looks like the good relationship between Shaoqing and Qinsang is indeed true. If we didn't invite Yuxiao and Netherspring, how could we suppress them? While he was thinking, he went forward and smiled. He bowed and said, "Taoist Qing Chenzi greets you." Qing Chenzi didn't say a word and returned the greeting. He then bowed to Tan Dingxian, and without looking around, he went to sit at Shaoqing's banquet. Not long after, Huanzhen Temple Jinren Pang and Pingdu Sect Jinren Wu also arrived. However, the two only greeted Tan and Bu before sitting down in the hall. Tan Dingxian thought to himself, Pingdu sect and Qinsang have always been close, so it's not strange for them to be on the same side. I didn't expect Huanzhen Temple to be the same, but it doesn't matter. These two sects still can't control the situation. Just as he was pondering, a sea of flowers suddenly flew over from the sky. Jinren Yuling was riding on a green carriage with phoenix wings. The wings on both sides were extended, and there were hundreds of beautiful maids. He was delighted and quickly went forward to greet them. After greeting each other, they laughed and walked into the hall. Soon, it was the end of the morning, a peng bird the size of 1,000 feet flew over with the wind. On its back, there was a daoren. Not far away, there was a big white feather fan. There was also a person standing on it with a peach tree branch hanging in his hand. Behind the two of them, there were hundreds of disciples and maids. Although they didn't have much cultivation, they were protected by the two's mana, so they wouldn't be hurt by the wind when they flew. Bu Jingsu bowed in front of the hall door and smiled, "Taoist friends, you're here." Huang Yugong returned the greeting and smiled, "Jinren Bu, is your sect master here?" Bu Jingsu said, "He's waiting in the hall, he's talking to Jinren Yuling." Huang Yugong said, "I'll go and greet him later." The three of them chatted for a while. Suddenly, Bu Jingsu saw a young man behind Huang Yugong. His cultivation was only one step away from forming his dan. He was slightly surprised, what a good piece of unpolished jade, is he your new disciple? Huang Yugong said, yes. Bu Jingsu couldn't help but sigh, such a talent is hard to find even in the 3 sections. Taoist friend, you're really fated. Xinren sure nodded. In terms of talent, none of his disciples could compare to this young man. Huang Yugong shook his head, Taoist friend, don't praise him. It's hard to find someone who can beat him in the same generation, so he's too arrogant. I brought him here to let him know how high the sky is and how deep the earth is, so he can get rid of his arrogance. Bu Jingsu said, without practice, it's hard to become a great person. With your skill, it's not hard to train a talent. Huang Yugong waved his hand, Taoist friend, you're flattering me. The 3 of them didn't talk much on the steps of the palace hall. Suddenly, a colorful jade plate appeared in the sky. It was wrapped in clouds, swaying and spiraling down. On top of the plate, there was a jade couch, and on it sat a petite female cultivator. Her eyes were bright, and her cheeks were rosy. She was wearing a colorful dress, and behind her were more than 500 young men and women. They were all wearing the same clothes, carrying swords and riding on clouds, looking around proudly. This time, Butian Pavilion sent a letter to invite them, and it involved the signing of the contract 1,000 years ago, so all the Taoist masters came personally. Therefore, most of them came with followers. There were very few who came alone like Qing Qinzi. Bu Jingsu went up and bowed, Taoist Master Wu. Taoist Master Wu bowed back and said, Taoist friend Bu, last time you came to the Yuanyang sect and left in less than a day. Was it because the Yuanyang disciples didn't treat you well? Bu Jingsu said, what are you talking about? It's just that I had an order from the sect, and my time was limited. I didn't dare to stay. Taoist Master Wu said, if you accepted the order and took the position of the sect master, why would you have to do this kind of welcoming and sending people off? Bu Jingsu obviously didn't want to continue the conversation, so he only bowed and said, please come in and take a seat. Taoist Master Wu chuckled and glanced at Taoist Shi and Huang Yugong. His face was full of disdain, and with a wave of his sleeve, he didn't even say half a word to the 2 of them, and brought the 1,000 disciples behind him into the palace. Inside the palace hall, her beautiful eyes drifted over. Seeing Qing Qinzi sitting on top, she couldn't help but smile. Huang Yugong and Taoist Shi also came into the palace hall, and greeted the people who came before. Half a moment later, a long turbid river was seen surging in the sky, followed by black clouds and white air, as well as filthy smoke and dense fog. Even before it arrived, the Pai Ji Palace was already shaking violently, as if it was in danger of being overturned. Tan Dingxian's expression changed, and he quickly used his mana to stabilize the palace. Bu Jingsu saw this, and also tried to protect him, but it was impossible to stabilize the palace with just the 2 of them. At this moment, suddenly a ray of starlight sprinkled over, the light was gentle, calm, and soothing, calming people's hearts, and stabilizing the palace hall. When the light dispersed, a handsome and refined man with fluttering robes came out, his appearance was outstanding, and his manner was graceful. And from the muddy spring, a yellow-robed Taoist with raised eyebrows came out. He looked tall and handsome, and the 2 of them looked at each other and left. The latter and the 5 people behind him went to the Devil Sect's palace hall, and the handsome cultivator went to the Xianmen. Tan Dingxian's expression brightened, and he unconsciously felt relieved. He recognized the person, it was Yu Xiao's newly promoted Grotto Heaven, Zhou Yong. His position in the sect was no less than Qinsang School's Qi Yuntian, and it was very likely that he would be the next leader of Yu Xiao School. Since this person was here, it was obvious that Yu Xiao placed great importance on this golden contract, and the chances of suppressing Qinsang School would be much higher. A smile appeared on his face, and he excused himself to Zhenren Yuling, and came out of the palace to greet him. Zhenren Zhou, greetings. Zhou Yong calmly returned the greeting, and said, Leader Tan, greetings. Tan Dingxian raised his hand and gestured to the side, and said, please take a seat. Huang Yugong saw the scene just now, and he unconsciously shook his head, and sighed, as expected of the great sects of the world, every generation has people who are extraordinary. Jinren said coldly, using the spiritual opportunity of a continent to build a sect. If it was the same for our sect, it would not be difficult. At this moment, other than Qinsang school who had yet to arrive, the Zenrens of the 16 sects had arrived. Zhu Zhen waited for more than an hour, and it was almost the end of the hour. Suddenly, the sound of wind and thunder came from the outside, and the vibration was endless. Everyone's spirit was slightly lifted, and they all knew that the people from Qinsang school had arrived. However, it seemed that the qi dynamic was concealed, and they could not see the person's appearance. After a short while, there was the sound of water and light landing on the stairs, followed by the sound of steady footsteps. Everyone unconsciously looked over, and with one glance, they were all stunned, and they could not help but stand up. Zhang Yan's robe fluttered, and he was the first to step into the palace. Behind him, there were 4 people following closely. Shen Baishuang, Han Ziyang, Sun Jian, and Peng Wenyin. Qinsang school actually sent 5 Grotto Heavens people at one go. Boom! There was a loud noise outside the palace, and 5 Grotto Heavens people came at the same time. Although they did not use their mana, it caused the thunder outside to rumble, and the lightning flashed, and the entire Pishi palace was in the midst of the tremors. Zhang Yan stopped in his tracks, and faced everyone's gaze. He looked around, and slightly raised his hand, and said, "Everyone, greetings." Chapter 10:28. Right after Zhang Yan and the rest stepped into the hall, the bell in the hall rang 9 times in a row. After a while, the hall door behind them was slammed shut. Tan Dingxian's heart skipped a beat when he heard it. He calmed himself down and returned the greeting, "Jinren Zhang, you're too kind." He then bowed to Shen Baishuang and the rest. "I didn't expect the 4 of you to be here today. I didn't know earlier and didn't come out to greet you. Please forgive me for my negligence." At the same time, the Jinren from the various sects returned the greeting. The 5 Dongtian sat together. It was an intimidating sight. Moreover, they were all from the same sect. Everyone in the hall, except for a few people, felt a heavy pressure pressing down on them. The 5 of them in front of Qinsang school were enough to wipe out the entire sect. If all 13 Dongtian worked together, what would it be like? Jinren Yuling pondered. Shen Baishuang is Jinren Zhuo's only disciple, Sun Jian's Qihai Jiutian Dharma is well known, Han Ziyang is from an aristocratic family, Peng Wenyin is from an aristocratic family, but she is close to sect leader Qin. Qinsang school should be telling the world that there is no more internal trouble. If there is an external enemy, we can work together to fight against them. Tan Dingxian wanted to suppress Qinsang school with his strength, but facing the 5 Dongtian Jinren, it was inevitable that he would lose his momentum. He watched as Zhang Yan and the rest took their seats. He took a deep breath and said slowly, "Since everyone is here, let's get down to business." He paused for a while and waited for everyone to look at him, then he said, "Ever since the ancestors came to the east and subdued the demons, the land of the 4 continents has been filled with qi and Tao. It has been more than 10,000 years. But today, the spiritual opportunity is fading, and the qi is insufficient. The reason for this is that we have taken too much advantage of it. Fortunately, the ancestors were able to identify this opportunity. Since then, the gathering of the Golden Book is still in order. Today, I have invited everyone here to continue the discussion." His voice trailed off. About 10 breaths later, Jinren said from his seat, "Leader Tan, the Golden Book has been passed down for tens of thousands of years. Everyone here knows the details, so there's no need to elaborate further. However, I do have a doubt." Tan Dingxian said, "Please speak, Jinren Shi." Jinren Shi said, "After the agreement is made, for the next 1,000 years, each sect must ensure the number of heavens in their sect. It's good that we don't have to add one more disciple, but Tan Zhangmen also said that we are in dire straits. Even if we sign the golden letter, can we really stop this trend?" Huang Yugong also said, "Jinren Shi's doubts are also my doubts. I hope that sect leader Tan can resolve our doubts." Tan Dingxian stroked his beard in silence, but Bu Jingsu stood up. He said, "Fellow Taoists, my Butian pavilion's name is Butian. Since I have been entrusted by Senior with the task of guarding the spiritual opportunity, I have not slacked for even a single day. Naturally, I will not rush over. To solve the current situation, I must have a plan. Jinrenshu said, why don't you tell me? Bu Jingsu raised his voice a few notches. He said, ever since the founding masters of the various sects settled down in Donghua, the younger generation of disciples have always harbored a cold heart. All of them are in fear and trepidation, afraid that the changes of the past will happen again. However, those who are not under the control of either Xianling or Xianling family are able to enjoy the spiritual opportunity without fear. What is the logic behind this? As soon as he said this, many people's expressions changed, but at the same time, they nodded their heads. Bu Jingsu continued, therefore, I would like to make an agreement with everyone here. After the agreement is signed, those who do not abide by the agreement will be killed. Jinren Wu said playfully, is Jinren talking about the demonic cultivators of the North Underworld? In the Donghua continent, the only ones who were not under the control of either Xianling or Xianling were the 8 divisions of the demon court that were entrenched in the North Underworld. However, at this moment, there were only the bat and ape divisions left. As for the carp and python divisions, they had already moved to the sea. Zhang Yan's eyes flashed slightly. Looking at these words, it seemed like Butian Pavilion wanted to encourage everyone to attack the demonic cultivators of the North Underworld. If this was really the case, it would be a good thing for the Qinsang school. That year, when the 12 heavens went on a northern expedition, they did not completely end the 8 divisions. One reason was that the founding master of the North Underworld left behind the demons to train the younger generation of disciples, so it was not good to be ruthless. The other reason was that at the last moment, Yu Xiao found an excuse to take back the spiritual cliff, so they could not solve the problem in one go. It was obvious that this was something that the Yu Xiao school had purposely left behind to restrain the Qinsang. Since this was the case, they would not let them off easily this time. There must be another reason behind this. Sure enough, Bu Jingsu shook his head and said, that's not the case. In these thousands of years, the demonic cultivators of the North Underworld have long given up on their power and turned into qi. As a cultivator, it is not good to see them as beasts. Moreover, the North Underworld continent is a place that Daoist Qinsang has pointed out, so it is not good to start a war. Apart from that, there is another reason. He opened his hand and a golden hair flew out. It was a ray of light that turned into a shadow. His body was withered and his face was blurry. After he appeared, he bowed to everyone and said, I am the Qi practitioner of the North Underworld, Li Fu. I pay my respects to all of you, spiritual masters. Bu Jingsu pointed and said, this is the leader of the North Underworld ape tribe. He heard about the matter of my golden contract and is willing to make a pact with me. Spiritual Master Wu said sarcastically, how can those demons sit with us? Li Fu laughed and said, Spiritual Master, you are wrong. If that spiritual opportunity is compared to a big boat, then we would have been passengers on the same boat. Spiritual Master Wu snorted and a look of disgust appeared on her face. However, she was well aware that Butian Pavilion did not have the ability to summon the demon cultivators of the North Underworld to sign the contract. There must be someone behind this. Arguing with him would obviously lower their own status. After saying that, she no longer paid attention to him. The others had the same thoughts as her. For a moment, no one objected. Zhang Yan looked on coldly and did not say a word. It was not difficult to see that this was done by Yuxiao School to prevent Qinsang School from taking advantage of the situation during the meeting. They used the excuse of killing the demon cultivators of the North Underworld who were guarding the spiritual opportunity as a preemptive step to block this road. Tan Dingxian was prepared to argue. However, after waiting for a while, there was no movement from Qinsang. It was as if they had acquiesced. It was completely different from what she had expected. She could not help but feel a little uneasy. However, at this moment, there was no time for her to think about anything else. She had to bite the bullet and do it. Huang Yugong looked at the seats and said, since Spiritual Master Li and the others are willing to sign the contract, then where are the unrighteous people that your school mentioned? Bu Jingsu bowed and said, outside of the East Sea, there are Chongyue and Qingyu families. Both of them have heavenly grottos. Chongyue has been guarding the temple for a long time and has been at odds with Xianmen for a long time. He is arrogant and arrogant. In order to mend the mysteries of heaven, we might as well get rid of him. Huang Yugong nodded and said, that's right. I also thought about it. That Qingyu Tao Zhenhong was a disgrace to Nanhua. He actually set up another school on the sea. He is arrogant and disrespectful to his elders. If we can get rid of him, we can get rid of a scourge in the world. Spiritual Master Shi continued, I heard that there are 2 heavenly grottos in the Dongxing continent beyond the ocean. I don't know what their background is, but they are suspected to be evil. They can be killed because of the righteous energy in the universe. Tan Dingxian nodded and said, if we get rid of these 4 people, the spiritual opportunity in the world can be stabilized. Everyone present was perceptive. It was not difficult to understand the underlying meaning. It was obvious that he was implying that Qinsang school did not care about the big picture and had 4 heavenly grottos in their school. This caused the spiritual opportunity in this world to be in a predicament. Jinren Yuling said in a deep voice, we have been out for a long time. Since Leader Tan has already decided on a plan, if there are no objections, how about we seal the agreement now? Tan Dingxian nodded and said, I dare not delay the fellow Taoists from all sections. He waved his hand and a Xian roll appeared in the hall. Then, 17 rays of spiritual light from top to bottom went into the seats of each sect. Li Fu immediately picked up the brush and signed his name without hesitation. Then, the ray of light returned to the Xian roll. The various Xuanma sections. Taihao and Nanhua only took a few glances before they put down their brushes with their seals. Pingdu sect's Wu Jinren cast a glance at the Yutsang sect's seats, as if he wanted to ask for some hint, but he still did not receive any response. Seeing the spiritual lights flying back to the golden list in the hall, he shook his head. He also wrote his name. When Jinren Pang came out, she had already decided to stand with Qinsang school. Hence, the latter did not move and she did not move as well. Both of them turned a blind eye to the spiritual light. Soon, the names of various sects appeared on the golden roll. Only Qinsang and Huanjin did not fall on it. Tan Dingxian opened his eyes slightly and looked at the situation in the hall. Almost all the cultivators in the world were on his side. Even the Shaoqing sect seemed to have compromised. Although Huanjin Temple did not agree, it was just a small flaw. If Qinsang school did not sign the contract, it would be disregarding justice and going against the trend. It would become the enemy of all sects in the world. However, he did not believe that Qinsang school was not afraid of this and dared to go against it. At this moment, all the gazes in the hall were focused on Qinsang school. Zhang Yan looked calm. He swept his gaze over and the spiritual light unfolded and turned into a piece of paper. From top to bottom, the first row of names was left by the second-generation head of Qinsang school, followed by the third-generation head of Qinsang school. After the fourth-generation head of Qinsang school, for thousands of years, the people who signed the contract were all Hall Master of Daylight Hall and Duzhen Hall Master. He looked deeply at it and read it line by line. Suddenly, he smiled faintly and stood up. He pressed his hand gently on it. Boom! In that instant, the entire contract agreement shattered into fragments that filled the sky. There was dead silence in the PG hall. Tan Dingxian's eyes widened and his voice trembled. He looked at him angrily and said, Jinren Zhang, what are you doing? He could not believe that Zhang Yan would break the contract on the spot. Not only that, he even erased the contract that Qinsang school had made for thousands of years. How dare he do this? Was he going to fall out with the world and become the enemy? Zhang Yan looked at him and said, the world can change, the heaven and earth can change, the sun and the moon can be replaced. What is the use of this? He looked around and his gaze was like a cold sword. He said, does anyone have any doubts? As he spoke, Shen, Sun, Han, and Peng all stood up slowly. Tan Dingxian looked up anxiously as if he wanted to seek help. everyone avoided his gaze. What made him even more terrified was that when he reached the seat of Yuxiao school, Zhou Yong also sat there without saying a word. Zhang Yan saw that no one responded. He flicked his sleeve and walked out. Shen Baishuang and the others did not stay for a moment and followed him out. A gleam of light appeared in Qing Chenzi's eyes. At this moment, he also stood up and pointed with his finger. Suddenly, a sword light flew up and in a flash, the Shaoqing sect's spell altar was split into two. He said coldly, since there are blades and swords, why bother with words? When he finished, he walked out without turning his head back. Bu Jingsu looked back and saw Tan Dingxian sitting there. Although his expression did not change, he understood his senior brother very well. However, he understood this senior brother of his extremely well. His senior brother was obviously panic-stricken and lost his composure, and he was only temporarily severing his mortal heart and forcefully calming himself down. He could not help but sigh to himself. Reality proved that if one had great power, they could disregard the rules. The so-called contract agreement was just a piece of waste paper in front of them. Just like when Yuxiao released the Sky Demon after the Heavenly Palace's meeting. The sects could only criticize him in secret, but no one dared to step out to criticize him. But once they did so, they would lose their reputation. However, this made him tremble in fear. Qinsang School's actions showed that they did not care about how their fellow Taoists viewed them. If such a large sect did not care about the so-called rules and righteousness, just as this thought arose, he did not dare to think further. Hearing the rumbling of thunder outside the hall, he sighed. The world is going to change. At this moment, outside, Zhang Yan and the other four were riding a boat back to Qinsang. Han Ziyang said, the sects should be aware of our actions this time. We, Qinsang, intend to fight. Shen Baishuang said coldly, stay if you are willing, leave if you are not. These are the words of the sect leader. Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back, looking at the sea of clouds floating and sinking. He turned back and said, I am the one who controls the universe, how can it be up to others? Everyone, when you return, prepare for battle with all your might. The four of them bowed and said in unison, we will follow Jinren's orders. Chapter 1029. Not long after, Zhang Yan, Shen Baishuang and the rest returned to the mountain gate. After separating from them, he went to the upper hall alone to meet the headmaster and report the details of the meeting. After that, he went to the side hall. Qi Yintian and Hu Xian were already waiting there. When he arrived, they asked about the PG Palace. Zhang Yan said, after going to the Heavenly Palace for a while, we have already seen our enemies. Batian, Taihao, and Nanhua have been won over by Yuxiao School. While Yuanyang's sect's intentions are unclear, they are not under our control. As for the 6 demonic sects, we should see them as our enemies. Hu Xian asked, can we be friends? Zhang Yan said, only Huanjin and Pingdu can be our wings. Qi Yintian asked, what is Lishan sect thinking? Zhang Yan thought for a while and said, they do not know my intentions. It is hard to make a judgment. Although Lishan sect seemed to be on good terms with Qinsang School, they had not formed an alliance. Qinsang School would not reveal their intentions. Similarly, Jinren Yuling was not sure of Qinsang School's true intentions. Although he appeared to be close to them, he did not completely turn to them. At this moment, he seemed a little distant. Qi Yintian thought for a while and said, Lishan sect is different from other sections. Their foundation is still shallow and they are afraid of being involved in disputes. Even if they know what I want, they might not dare to stand with me. Hu Xian said in a low voice, when I was cultivating under Jinren Chen, I once played chess with sect leader Jinren and evaluated the people of the present age. Sect leader Jinren once said that if this founding master of Mount Li made up her mind, there was a chance that she could ascend to another world. The reason why she didn't leave was because there was no successor in the sect and she was afraid that once she left, the sect would decline. Secondly, she came from a small sect and didn't have any inheritance from the previous generation. If that is the case, we can start now. Qi Yintian looked over and said, Junior apprentice brother Hua is right. Qinsang's school will give her a push and help her jump out of this chess game. Hu Xian said, that is exactly what I mean. Even if you are not my friend, you should try not to be my enemy. Once a cultivator achieved mortal shedding, he would be able to break through the realm. However, to reach this state, he would need a lot of spiritual opportunity. Lishan Sect's spirit cave was not stable to begin with. If this incident were to happen, it would not collapse and it would be difficult for the later generations to form a paradise. Therefore, Yuling Jinren's cultivation had clearly reached a certain level. However, he did not move. If Qinsang's school could help him and send him away, there would be one less variable in the human tribulation. Zhang Yan said, Senior Martial Brother Hua's plan is good, but there's something wrong with it. The price of ascending is not small. If they did that, they would be letting the Li Mountain sect take advantage of them for nothing. Although our Qinsang school has a strong foundation, a great calamity is about to befall us, and we cannot squander it recklessly. Hu Xian admitted, I have thought about it in a hurry, and it is inevitable that there will be many mistakes. Master Zhang, do you have any countermeasures? Zhang Yan smiled, this matter does not necessarily require our Qinsang school to do it. I think Yu Xiao is also not willing to see Yuling Jinren enter our Qinsang school's formation. I have a plan. We might be able to use this to hurt Yu Xiao's vitality a little. He whispered a few words, and both Qi and Hu Xian nodded. This plan could advance or retreat. Even if Yu Xiao did not take the bait, it would be enough to stop Yuling from being a threat to them. After discussing this matter, the three of them talked about the North Underworld demon cultivation. Hu Xian said, if we can achieve the human tribulation, such a demon must be eliminated. Zhang Yan sneered, since they went to PG Palace to sign the contract, they must have taken precautions beforehand. Before I returned, I looked to the east, but I could not find Suyue's qi. Just now, when they came out of PG Palace, they could take advantage of the unstable minds of the sects to exterminate the demon cultivation division. However, after looking at the qi, not only did Suyue's qi disappear, even Li and Yan's qi could not be seen. It wasn't hard to imagine that it was Yu Xiao, Heaven Mending, and the other sects that were causing trouble behind the scenes. Qi Yuntian said, there are not many places to hide in the East Sea. They should be hiding in Yuanjun Palace. This palace is heavily guarded, and it is extremely difficult to break through. We can put this matter aside for now. When I am ready, we will deal with it. Zhang Yan and Hu Xian both nodded in agreement. Yuanchun Palace was heavily guarded. Because Yu Xiao took back the Jade Cliff in advance, they could not really break through it during the northern expedition. If they were to attack now, even if they had a treasure like the 36 mountains, it would be difficult to ensure that the North Underworld continent would not be destroyed after a long time. When the people of the heavenly abode reached the second stage realm, as long as they hid in the heavenly abode, they would be able to hide for a period of time. If they were to get Yu Xiao's support, it would be even more difficult to wipe them out. However, if it was the day of the disaster, they would not have to worry about it. The three of them discussed and came up with various countermeasures. Just now, they dispersed at night. After Zhang Yan came out, he returned to the Duzhen Hall. He first ordered Jing Yu to bring a pen and paper to write a letter. He then used his mana to send it to Clear Feather Sect. When he was done, he suddenly felt a burst of vitality coming from somewhere in Xuanza realm. Even the small realm was shaking. His gaze focused, he waved his sleeves and left the hall, flying towards that direction. In a flash, he arrived at the surface of the sea. With a wave of his hand, the seawater was parted in an instant, and he quickly arrived at the bottom. He saw a mound that was thousands of feet high, and it was the size of a mountain. There was an object standing on top of it, and it was the divine beast egg that he had placed here. Since this thing entered this place, it was constantly absorbing spiritual opportunity. However, it was usually like a cultivator cultivating his qi. It was neither hot nor hot. However, for some reason, it was swallowing the spiritual opportunity in one breath. It was as if it wanted to swallow all the spiritual opportunity in this realm. With this crazy action, it was shaking non-stop as if something was going to rush out from inside. Zhang Yan looked at it for a moment and he understood something. This kind of divine beast was responding to the heaven and earth. It must have sensed that the disaster was coming and wanted to come out to face the disaster. However, based on the absorption of spiritual vigor by this object, it could only be supported by the spiritual cave of a continent. Once it was born, it would cause the small world to collapse. Moreover, it was not the best time to do so. He immediately went forward and placed his hand on it. This is not the time for you to be born. After saying it a few times, this thing seemed to understand what he said. The vitality faded slightly and it gradually returned to its original quiet state. After a day, this thing was finally calmed down by him and there was no more movement. Zhang Yan saw that there was nothing else, so he left the sea and returned to the hall. At this moment, a boy came to report, "Master, Jinren Fu is outside and wants to see you." Zhang Yan sat on the jade platform and said, "Let him in." After a while, Fu Baoxing came in from outside and bowed, "Disciple greets master." "Zhang Yan, it is not the middle of the month. Disciple is here for something." Fu Baoxing bowed again and said, "Just now, disciple received a letter from my eldest disciple, Long Huaishan. Since I left the Deep Abyss School, he has been in charge of the school. In the letter, he said that the demon python tribe that was occupying the North Sea realm suddenly abandoned the island and their whereabouts are unknown. He searched all over Dongsheng but did not find them. He suspected that they were plotting something and sent a letter to inform me. I feel that this is not a small matter and I need to inform master." Zhang Yan nodded and said, "You did not do badly. When did this happen?" Fu Baoxing replied, "It should be in August." Zhang Yan heard that it was a month before the meeting at PG Palace. It seemed that not only the carp tribe but also the python tribe had escaped. They must have been afraid that the Qinsang school would punish them, so they hid in advance. However, their whereabouts could not be hidden for long. After a few days, when the mana dispersed, it would not be difficult to find them. He nodded and said, "I know. You can leave first." Fu Baoxing said yes and bowed before leaving the hall. Zhang Yan sat on the couch for a while before returning to the main hall to meditate and cultivate. In the blink of an eye, half a month passed. Suddenly, a ray of light came from the outside and turned into a letter. It was wrapped in a silver feather and floated in front of him. Zhang Yan glanced at it and opened the letter. After a few glances, he shook his shoulder and a wisp of clear air flew out from the top of his head. In an instant, it turned into a clone. With a shake of his sleeve, he wrapped the silver feather and flew out of the small world. He then walked up the high cloud and quickly arrived outside the third heaven. He sent the feather out and a ray of green light flashed by. It turned into a young Taoist wearing a feather robe and a star crown. It was the sect master of the Clear Feathers School, Tao Zhenhong. He came forward and bowed and said, "Jinren Zhang is too polite." Zhang Yan returned the greeting and said with a smile, "I didn't expect fellow Taoist Tao to come so quickly." Tao Zhenren said, "After receiving Jinren's letter, I felt that this matter was not small and it involved the life and death of the school. I didn't dare to delay and immediately sent this clone to meet you." Zhang Yan said, "I have already explained the matter in PG Palace in the letter. What does fellow Taoist Tao think about it?" Tao Zhenren shook his head and said, "Even though I'm an abandoned disciple of Nan Hua, that is still where my teacher cultivates. I don't want to be enemies with them, but since they want to destroy me, I naturally won't sit and wait for death. I'm willing to serve your school in the future." Even though he had established another school on the sea, if his original school was willing to accept him, he could at least be considered a lower school. In the past 10,000 years, there had been precedents. However, Huang Yu's words in PG Palace could be said to have completely cut off the path of the Clear Feathers School. Moreover, he already owed Zhang Yan a favor, so he naturally came over without hesitation. Zhang Yan laughed heartily and said, "Today, there's a matter that I need fellow Taoist Tao to do." Tao Zhenren said with a serious expression, "Zhenren, please speak." Zhang Yan told him about the matter of Li Xiaomi and said, "This person's talent is not bad. Now that he has the help of my school and a lot of elixirs, it's very likely that he will have some achievements in the next 100 years. However, Yu Xiao will definitely find an excuse to wipe out his backyard before that. I need Jinren to make a trip to the South Sea to protect this person. If it's convenient, you can also move the Clear Feathers school here, and the two schools can work together to fight against the enemy. Tao Zhenhong did not hesitate at all and immediately agreed. After I return, I will arrange for this matter. In reality, if there was a crisis at the East Sea, it would be convenient for the Qinsang school to extend a helping hand. However, he also knew that this was not the time to talk about personal friendship. If the Clear Feathers school was not willing to put in a lot of effort, the Qinsang school would not help for no reason. He thought for a while and said, from what Jinren said, the sect seemed to be unable to tolerate the Chongyue True Temple. Zhang Yan smiled and said, is Jinren thinking of persuading them? Tao Jinren said, that's my intention. Once the calamity comes, the East Sea will no longer be an unworldly place, and the Chongyue True Temple will not be able to stand alone. Mi Jinren is also looking for a countermeasure, so why not tell him about the pros and cons and persuade him to join my formation? Zhang Yan said, Jinren, are you confident? Tao Jinren bowed and said, I am willing to try. Chapter 1030. Clear Feather Sect. In the main hall of Mystic Spirit Island, Sect Master Tao Zhenhong kept his doppelganger and returned. After sitting for a while, he ordered his disciples to be summoned. When they were all in the hall, he told them that a calamity was coming and no one could escape, so they needed to plan a way out. He also said that they needed to form an alliance with Qinsong, so they needed to send the sect to the South China Sea. The disciples had no say in such a big matter, so they all said that they were willing to follow their master's orders. After he instructed them, he left his doppelganger and flew towards the place where Mi Jinren cultivated. The latter's residence was on Moon Chasing Island, which was 3,000 miles east of the main sect. It was originally a huge rock that was left behind from ancient times on the sea. It was called Euphoria, and like a celestial abode, it could absorb the spiritual vigor of the sea to provide for the sect's cultivators. However, the sea was different from the land, so after a few hundred years, it had to be changed. He flew along the sea for more than a minute and saw a huge rock reef standing alone on the surface of the water. After being washed by the waves for many years, the edges were long gone, and only a peach tree was growing in the crevice of the rock. It was extremely prosperous, with fallen flowers, and it was very pleasing to the eye. Under the tree was a jade disc that was about 10 feet tall. It was as smooth as water, clean and dustless, and could reflect one's figure. There were no weeds or moss around it, and it made one's heart calm. He stopped and went under the jade disc. He stood 3 feet away and cupped his hands, saying, Mi Jinren, I'm here to visit. In just 2 to 3 breaths, a graceful lady with palace makeup slowly appeared on the jade disc. She had a tall nose and slender eyebrows, but her gaze revealed that she was suspicious of everything in the world. She said with slight sarcasm, Sect Master Tao, ever since you established Clear Feather Sect, this is the first time you've come to visit me. Could it be that you've encountered some difficulties and need my help? Tao Zhenren smiled, there is indeed a difficulty, but this time, your Chongyue True Temple is also among them. Therefore, I've come to inform you. Mi Zhenren raised her eyebrows and looked at him seriously before saying, please enlighten me. Tao Zhenren said, at the beginning of the month, the 16 sects of the Donghua continent gathered in the PG Palace for a meeting. This time, we accepted Butian Pavilion's invitation to establish a contract with a golden book to protect the spiritual vigor of the 9 continents. The golden book stood for 1,000 years. The Chongyuzhen Guan had been established for thousands of years, so Mi Jinren had heard about it as well. She frowned and said, so what? What does it have to do with me? Tao Zhenren said, your temple is far away from the continent and has not been in contact with Donghua for a long time. You also do not rely on the spiritual cave for nourishment, so I guess you don't know that under the Great Trial, the sects have the intention to kill the 2 of us to maintain spiritual vigor. Mi Jinren was startled. Then, she calmed herself down and asked, what happened next? Tao Xinren briefly told her about what happened in the palace and said, fortunately, Xinren Zhang of the Qinsang school did not accept this proposal and destroyed the contract, so this matter was suppressed. However, Daoist me, you have to understand one thing. The sects will definitely not let this matter go. In their eyes, we are the people who steal spiritual vigor, the weakest of the scattered sects that should be cleaned up. Mi Xinren was silent. After a long time, she said, how does leader Tao plan to deal with it? Tao Xinren smiled and said, I'm just returning from the Qinsang school now. Although he did not say it clearly, it was not difficult for Mi Xinren to read the meaning behind it. She sneered and said unwillingly, if the Donghua clan attacks my sect, it will also be a loss of spiritual vigor. Based on what leader Tao said, they don't even have enough hidden talents. Why would they take the risk to harm me? Tao Zhenhong said calmly, just like what Mi Xinren said, your sect is safe and lucky. It has been the same for the past 300 to 400 years. However, if the calamity comes, no one will allow your sect to exist on the sea. With this, Mi Xinren's expression changed slightly. She also knew that if the Donghua clan really fought, they would not allow Chongyuezhen Temple to watch from the sidelines. She snorted and said in a fit of pique, but I can also choose to join Yu Xiao. Why must I join you? Tao Xinren shook his head and said, your sect is like my clear feather sect. There is only one person in each sect, and one person controls everything. If the calamity comes, the 9 continents' grotto heavens will all fall into this chess game. Yu Xiao has always been cold and indifferent, and they come from a sect. If Xinren is there, I'm afraid he is just a pawn that can be abandoned at any time. Mi Xinren heard him say it so straightforwardly and did not feel angry. However, she also knew that what he said was true. She had no peers in the sect and no peers outside. She was all alone. If she joined Yu Xiao, if they ordered her to do something dangerous, she could only submit. She was indeed similar to a pawn. However, even though she knew this, she could not help but say sarcastically, will the Qinsang school not be like this? Tao Xinren said plainly, of course it is different. Today, I am here as proof. He looked at Mi Xinren and asked, what do you think, friend? After a while, Mi Xinren said, 10 days later, there will be an answer. Tao Xinren bowed and said, then I will take my leave. Mi Xinren returned the greeting and said, Aunt Tao, send the guest off on my behalf. Suddenly, a pink mist floated up from under the peach tree and turned into a beautiful woman. She raised her hand and gestured with a smile, Tao Xinren, please. Tao Zhenhong nodded slightly and flew out of the island. He knew that if there were no external interference, the matter would be 70% settled. As for the remaining 30%, it was not inside but came from the outside. If Yu Xiao's side came to speak at this time, it would add more variables. However, he was already prepared for this move. This avatar did not return to the sect but hid in the clouds. As long as the sea came over, he would kill it. In the Fangchen courtyard of Qinsang School, hundreds of Taoists surrounded the earthly fire heavenly cauldron. They looked at the blazing true fire in the cauldron with nervous expressions. Headmaster Su Yingtong also looked solemn. He reached out and pointed a few times. The tokens and talismans in front of him flew out and turned into a ray of light. They flew above the flame and floated in the air. Then, colorless spiritual dust floated down. When the huge fire came into contact with the dust, it retreated abruptly and quickly disappeared. Only a dust-covered mountain could be seen in the heavenly cauldron. Su Yingtong picked up a horsetail whisk from the table and stood up. He stepped on the astral wind and circled around the mountain a few times. With a wave of the horsetail whisk, the courtyard was instantly stirred up by a strong gust of wind, sweeping away the smoke and dust. That mountain seemed to have taken off a layer of gauze, immediately revealing its true appearance. He did not look at the details and only looked at the shape of the mountain. He saw hundreds of mountains and thousands of ridges gathered together. The mountain was majestic and had a momentum that could rise into the sky. After looking at it a few more times, his face showed a satisfied expression. This item could be considered as the work of his painstaking efforts. With his lifespan, he was afraid that he would not be able to make something like this in the future. Unfortunately, because it was placed in the fetus of heaven and earth, he could not refine it into the square inch with his mana. If he wanted to go to outer space, he could only use his mana to send it. While he was sizing it up, he suddenly heard the cry of cranes. It was dozens of red-crowned cranes flying in from outside. Behind them, there were hundreds of birds flying around the forest. They stopped on the branches and chirped continuously. It turned out that the overflowing spiritual vigor attracted the spiritual birds. He raised his hand and wanted to stop them. However, he changed his mind again. With the fetus of heaven and earth in this item, it was inevitable. This spiritual vigor was nothing. Instead, it could add vitality. Thus, he leaned down and pulled a disciple over. He stuffed a talisman into his hand and said, "Take this talisman to the Duzhan Hall master and tell him that the broken pillar has been refined." The disciple quickly took it and bowed. He spread out the talisman and instantly turned into a rainbow light, rushing to the sky. In the Duzhan Hall, when Zhang Yan heard that the broken pillar had been refined, he immediately set up the carriage and headed to the Fangchen courtyard. Suing Tong led the disciples to welcome him and led him into the inner room. In front of the heavenly cauldron, Zhang Yan looked up and saw that this item was different from the last time he saw it. There were fewer traces of craftsmanship, as if it was naturally made. The high mountain hung in the clouds, the water moon entered the valley, circling and turning. The distant shadow was like a painting. Among the mountains, the pavilions, the bridges, and the corridors were undulating high and low. They were in picturesque disorder. Sometimes they entered the crevices of the rocks, sometimes they reached the cliffs. Dozens of sections of waterfalls rushed down from the top, stirring up water mist and beads. The rain and mist lingered in the clouds. It was a spectacular sight. However, with his Dharma vision, there were still many places that were lacking. If he went beyond the sky, he would inevitably be unable to protect it under the blowing of the wind and poisonous fire. He would need to set up a few more prohibitions. However, this was caused by the lack of mana of the cultivators of the Fangchen courtyard. It was not because they were slacking, so there was no need to criticize them. When they reached the top of the clouds, they could just set up a formation. He nodded and praised, "Fangchen courtyard has done well." Suing Tong held back the excitement in his heart and said, "I don't deserve your praise. If it wasn't for the fetus of heaven and earth, how could my courtyard have refined such a strange item? I dare to say that under the nourishment of this broken pillar, for a long time, it will definitely form a spiritual vein of mountains and rivers. If it is carefully protected, even if it ascends to the 9 heavens, it will not lose a place beyond the world." Zhang Yan smiled and said, "Everyone in the Fangchen courtyard, you have done your best and worked hard for many years. In the future, there will be rewards." Hearing this, not only was Suing Tong happy, the hundreds of Taoists below were also happy and bowed to thank him. Zhang Yan looked at Jing Yu beside him. The latter understood and walked out, saying, "Elder Su, Master needs to send this broken pillar up to the sky. Your mana is not enough, so you cannot stay here. It is better for you to leave with Xiao Tong." Elder Su hurriedly agreed and called out to the Taoists in the courtyard. They quickly left. Zhang Yan waited until there was no one left before he waved his sleeve and immediately opened the various formations on the broken pillar. With a shake of his body, there was a rumble, and a beam of chi of the chaotic underworld rose, rolling and rolling as if it wanted to envelop the sky. Following the rise of this chi, the broken pillar also shook and left the ground, slowly floating into the sky. Under the protection of his mana, the pillar quickly reached the 9 heavens. When it was one step away from leaving the void, it stopped and let it hang there. He then kept his dharma and entered a flying palace at the highest point. Looking down from there, he could see the 4 continents of Donghua. Further away, the 3 continents of the west could also be vaguely seen. With a thought, he used his dharma eyes to observe. Everything in the continents, from the small plants, insects and flies to the large rivers and mountains, could be clearly seen. He couldn't help but think, Butian Pavilion has always been drifting between heaven and earth. It seems that not only can they sense the changes in the spiritual opportunities of heaven and earth, but if they want to, they can also monitor the movements of the various sections. Fortunately, with the changes in the spiritual opportunities, they won't be able to stand for long. Chapter 1031. Zhang Yan stood on top of the broken pillar and looked at the scenery of the 9 continents. After a long time, he suddenly saw a lotus-like halo above the East Flower continent. It shone with 7 colors and constantly flashed with dazzling light. He unconsciously focused his eyes and realized that someone was breaking a small world. He pondered for a while and determined that this was done intentionally by someone. If it was an ordinary heavenly grotto heaven's small world that had been passed down from ancient times, it would have collapsed long ago if there was no one living in it. However, if it was created by an almighty being, it might not collapse even after tens of thousands of years. However, if it was broken, it would occupy a portion of spiritual opportunity. If it could be broken, the spirit cave in the continent could be stabilized for a period of time. Although it would not last long, it was better than nothing. However, if this small world belonged to any sect, they would not be willing to do so. This time, it should be a small world without a master. Although this kind of small world was hidden in a place where no one could find it, if one wanted to find it, it would not be difficult. For example, Butian Pavilion had been patrolling above the 9 continents for 10,000 years. In terms of understanding of the world, no one could compare to them. They were especially good at forging weapons, so it was possible that they could find 1 or 2 small worlds left behind by the ancient times. He smiled faintly. He would think more about this later. He moved his feet and walked towards the main hall. Not long after, he arrived at the bottom of the stairs. He raised his head and saw that the board was white. It was obvious that it had not been named yet. He thought for a while and wrote the 3 words, Azure Sky Hall, with his fingers. Just now, the entire hall seemed to have a spirit and suddenly let out several chimes. He nodded his head and strode into the hall. Other than the servants and living beings, the furnishings were all complete. He went straight to the jade couch and sat down. He breathed in and out but felt that the spiritual vigor was slightly insufficient. The fetus of heaven and earth seemed to have fallen into a deep sleep. Its breath was very weak. This was reasonable. Although this thing was strange, it still existed on the 9 continents. It would take a few years for it to gather its spiritual opportunity. At that time, it would slowly become a continent outside of the world. It would not be under a paradise like the 3 lakes. He pointed a finger, and a stone flood dragon head rose from the small pond below the stage. There was a pearl in the mouth of the flood dragon, and it was the key to this formation. He pressed his hand down, and his mana circulated, and the situation inside and outside of the formation was clearly investigated. Just as he had expected, the power of the formation outside the mountain was slowly being eroded by the poisonous fire and strong wind. In less than half a month, it would be able to wear through the restrictions and destroy the mountains and rivers of this place. If he wanted to prevent the erosion of the external chi, he would have to set up a large formation outside the hall, which would take a lot of effort. If someone from another heavenly grotto was here and saw this scene, they would probably turn around and leave immediately. They would rather abandon this place. He didn't want to damage his own cultivation, not to mention that a great calamity was about to arrive. He had to be even more cautious. However, he was different. Not to mention that he had achieved the ultimate technique, he was now at the strength transformation stage 5. Even if he lost some of his power, as long as he went back and cultivated a little, he would be able to recover. Naturally, he didn't have such concerns. He immediately leaped out and formed a hand seal to gather the outer heavenly star sand. Guided by his magic power, the astral sand in the 9 heavens gathered like a sea of sand. It rolled up and poured into his sleeves. In every layer of heaven, there was gang sand. However, they were all different. The higher one went, the fiercer it was. If it was close to the void, the gang sand would not be inferior to the poisonous fire from beyond the sky. After refining it a little and releasing it during the battle, it would become a vicious magical weapon. Even the people of the heavenly abode would have to be careful. Since it was convenient this time, he let go of his magic power and collected a little more. As the astral sand wasn't gathered in one place, he needed to travel around the 9 continents to collect it. Moreover, he used a lot of it to refine the formation, which was why it took him 30 days. Just now, he stopped. After he stopped, he returned to the broken pillar and used another month to form a big one on the outside. However, this was only a rough refinement. It would still take a year and a half to refine it repeatedly before it could be stable. At that time, the spiritual aura would also be abundant. When the two of them were in sync, there would be no more mistakes. After that, he wanted to return to Chinsang school. However, this temple couldn't be left unattended, so he took a spell. Not long after, a few red-crowned cranes came down from the sky and knelt on the ground. They spoke in human language, "Greetings, Jinren." Zhang Yan tossed over a dozen form transformation pellets and said, "After I leave, all of you will stay here and clean up the palace. Guard the place diligently. If you see any enemies, quickly ring the bell and let me know." The few red-crowned cranes hurriedly agreed. Zhang Yan waved his sleeves and walked out. He looked around and felt that the mountains were quiet and the sky was silent. It was a little depressing. He thought about it and realized that it was because there were too few living beings in this place. Although the remnant pillar had attracted hundreds of spiritual birds when it was first refined, the borders of this place were vast, and it was still not enough. It was fine on the surface, but outside the 9 heavens, there was not enough life force. He needed to add more beasts and birds. However, there was no need for him to do such a small thing. Naturally, his disciples would do it for him. Among the disciples, the most suitable person for this matter was Han Zuocheng. This disciple had been quite diligent recently. A year ago, he had finally cultivated Yuanying. However, it wasn't very possible for him to go further. It was a good time to summon him to guard this green sky hall. After thinking about it, he was about to use his mana to go down to the East Flower continent. Coincidentally, at this moment, there was a strange feeling in his heart. He turned his head and looked into the void. Where his eyes landed, he saw a floating palace. The door was hexagonal, and there were 10 palaces. The roof tiles were gorgeous, and the colors were rich. It looked small and wide, flat, like a floating scroll painting. The spiritual vigor of this hall was extremely minute. If it wasn't for the fact that he had refined the seed of thought in his body, he would have missed it just now. However, he was slightly surprised and thought to himself, how can there be such a magnificent temple outside the 9 heavens? After thinking for a while, he recalled something and said, the Pengyuan sect has an item called the Star-Shocking Heavenly Palace. I heard that it roams the void all year round, but I've never seen it before. Could it be that it's this item? He took a few more glances and realized that there weren't any restrictions around the palace. However, it didn't seem to be afraid of the poisonous fire and strong wind. He couldn't help but be interested and flew over. Very quickly, he got close to the main hall. He took a closer look and couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. From the looks of it, this palace was indeed a scroll painting. Not only that, it was actually in between reality and illusion. 70% of it was in the painting, and 30% was outside. When the poisonous fire and strong wind came over, they were transferred into the painting and turned into a scene on the painting. It hung there quietly, and the palace itself could avoid a disaster. Even if there were no restrictions to protect it, it wouldn't be damaged. He saw that there were still many empty spots on the painting that hadn't been contaminated by the sand. According to this situation, it could at least be protected for 1,000 years. However, even if that time came, the person who created this palace should have a way to deal with it. He didn't think that he could do such a thing. Perhaps only those who had achieved ascension would be able to do it. Just as he was looking, he saw an old Taoist with wrinkled brows and a head of white hair walk out from the palace in the painting. The old Taoist was dressed in a gray robe and had an aged face. The old Taoist waved at him and moved sideways to make way for him. It was obvious that the old Taoist was inviting him to be his guest. Zhang Yan pondered for a moment and smiled. Clear chi flowed out from the top of his head and turned into a doppelganger that stepped into the painting. As soon as he entered, he felt the scenery in front of him change. He turned around and found that he had indeed entered the painting. That Daoren smiled at him and made a hand gesture before walking into the palace. He smiled and followed. He saw the two of them going back and forth in the painting, passing through corridors and bridges. Finally, they arrived at a courtyard that was piled up with strange rocks and stopped under a pear tree. That Daoren turned around and bowed to him, saying, "Jinren Zhang, Daoren greets you." Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows and returned the greeting. He said, "I didn't think that you would recognize but how should I address you?" That Daoren stroked his beard and said, "Daoren Jingcang. Taihao School, Mount Duguang." In the depths of the Great Mountain protecting Formation Hanxiu True Shifting Great Void Defense Formation, there was a giant tree that reached the clouds. There were 4 leaves on it, and each leaf pointed in one direction. Because the leaves were so wide, even the mountains in the distance were under its shade. Taihao School Master Shang Shooting stood under the tree. He looked up and stroked his beard without saying a word. Jinren stood behind him and said in a small voice, "Schoolmaster, are we really going to take one leaf and give it to Butian Pavilion?" Shang Shooting said with certainty, "Butian Pavilion is an ally. How can we sit back and do nothing? We have to help them." This giant tree was one of the 3 godly trees in the Taihao School, and it was the only one that was personally planted by the founder of the school. It was placed here to suppress this formation. The green leaves on the tree were connected to each other. If it was taken down, there was no need to refine it. It could fly with the wind and carry the mountain. The day before yesterday, Tan Dingxian, the schoolmaster of Butian Pavilion, wrote a letter to tell him that because the pure energy in the school was getting weaker and weaker, the school was in danger of collapsing. He hoped that Taihao School could borrow 1 leaf for the sake of their friendship in the alliance. Jinren Shi's face showed a look of regret. To outsiders, this tree was only the eye of the formation. However, as a heavenly cave in the school, he knew that this godly tree had other uses. Once it was fully grown, it could connect to the roots of the earth, and all the spiritual energy in the world could be used by Taihao School. If it really became one with the fate of the world, no other school would be able to suppress it. However, it needed to be carefully guarded. Not a single leaf or branch could be damaged. Otherwise, it would be impossible. Shang Shooting said, "I know what you are thinking. However, it is just a delusion. For this tree to be fully grown, it would take 90,000 years. Even if our Taihao School could survive until then, the other schools would not sit and wait for this to happen." Jinren Shi also knew this, but he was still a little unwilling. After all, this kind of wood spiritual item would be much more useful in the hands of his own people than to give it to other schools. Thus, he said, "Schoolmaster, can we politely decline this request?" Shang Shooting shook his head and said, "This time, it was Yu Shao who came forward to invite us. We just signed the contract, so it wouldn't be appropriate for us to turn around and refuse. Moreover, Heaven Mending Pavilion didn't take it for nothing. They were willing to use a formation diagram and a true weapon to exchange for it, while I only took a young leaf. Comparing the two, we are not at a disadvantage." Jinren Shi said, "I heard from Brother Huang that Butian Pavilion is also asking for their help. I am afraid that the purpose is not that simple." Shang Shooting's expression was indifferent as he said, "Even if there is no need to look into it. Our future opponent is a big school like Qinsong. If our ally is strong, it will not be bad for us." Chapter 1032. As soon as Zhang Yan saw Doran's face, he knew that the other was only a wisp of his soul. But when he heard him introduce himself, he was slightly surprised and asked, "Are you the master of Shaocang Realm, Grand Master Jingcang?" Daoist Jingcang said with a smile, "It is Daoren. However, I did not open that Shaocang Realm. Before I ascended, I lived there for a period of time. I had an idea and left behind 1 or 2 descendants." Zhang Yan's eyes flashed and he said, if I guessed correctly, this place should be the startling day Heavenly Palace? Grandmaster Jingcang nodded and said, yes. Zhang Yan said thoughtfully, if that's the case, then the Grandmasters of Pingyuan and Shaocang sects are the same person. Pingyuan sect had always been vague about the name of their Grandmaster. However, when Taoist Nun Wei came to Donghua continent, she saw that the techniques of the two sects were similar and asked for a favor from him. She went to pay a visit, but there were no results. Now, she got the answer here. The two sects were indeed from the same source. Old ancestor Jingcang chuckled and said, this old Taoist likes to travel all my life and also likes to meddle in other people's business. Every time I go to a place, if I see the local young men and women with decent aptitudes, or those who are full of righteousness, I can't help but give them pointers on the path of cultivation. I don't know how many cultivation methods I've passed on, but only these two sects are able to pass them down to this day. Zhang Yan nodded and asked, but how does fellow Taoist know of me? Grandmaster Jingcang said with a smile, in Pingyuan sect, every time someone wants to use the Heavenly Palace's demonic qi to defeat the enemy, they must communicate with me through their spirit. After a few times, I can know what they usually do and what they are thinking. Fellow Taoist's disciple, Jiang Zheng, once cultivated the Celestial Fire's 6 imperial techniques, so I know you. Zhang Yan looked at him and said, fellow Taoist, you must have a reason for inviting me here today. Old ancestor Jingcang cupped his fist and said sincerely, inviting fellow Taoist here, there is indeed something we need to discuss. After a pause, he said in a deep voice, Daoren, my original body was a qi practitioner from the Southern Cliffs continent. My sect was chased out of the continent by a sect. Since then, I could only wander around in search of a suitable place to cultivate Tao. However, since the sect was destroyed, it was extremely difficult for a rogue cultivator to seek Tao. I thought it would be difficult for this body to seek Tao, but the heavens did not give up on me. I inadvertently found a treasure that helped me find the small world of the predecessors, which gave my original body the ability to ascend. Zhang Yan listened from the side and did not interrupt. However, when he heard that the other party was a cultivator from the Southern Cliffs continent and was expelled, his heart was slightly moved. Old ancestor Jingcang continued, although my original body has already cast off the mundane world and gone to another realm, before that, I left behind a fragment of my divine will in this palace. My original intention was to control this treasure, but I did not expect that it was also because of this that it was able to help me. Unfortunately, it is also because of this that my life and death are in the hands of others, and from then on, I cannot control myself. Under his detailed explanation, only then did Zhang Yan know that when this Shinrin Jingcang was traveling in the void once, he came across this celestial palace. He guessed that in ancient times, a cultivator had died while vanquishing demons and devils, so he left this palace outside the sky. This treasure had already lost its true spirit and was nothing more than a dead object. Initially, he was not very interested, but in a moment of impulse, he decided to insert a fragment of his divine will into it and replace the true spirit to control this treasure. Because at that time, this treasure had been corroded for thousands of years outside the 9 heavens, and a small part of it had been worn away by the poisonous fire and strong wind. Therefore, he took out many precious materials that he obtained from the small world and refined it again, turning it into its current form. After that, he passed down a Tao technique in the Donghua continent, so that his disciples could use this celestial palace to fight against enemies. However, he did not expect that not long after this was done, he suddenly felt that fate had arrived, so he hurriedly abandoned all matters of the mundane world and broke through the world to ascend. Although he left, this fragment of divine will remained. Because it was not the original true spirit of this palace, it should have disappeared after a few hundred years, but after the divine will of the Pingyuan disciples resonated with it, it actually nourished its body, allowing it to exist in the world for a long time. But similarly, if this sect's disciples were defeated and died, the consequences were self-evident. In the end, old ancestor Jingcang said, now that the great calamity is approaching, if they meet with a calamity, I will also not exist. Usually, I am restrained here and rarely see outsiders, so I feel that I cannot escape this calamity. Today, seeing fellow Taoist, it is a blessing, so I shamelessly invited you. Zhang Yan changed his mind. His disciple, Jiang Zheng, was in Penyuan. Even if he did not say it, Zhang Yan would not sit and watch him be defeated and die. Since he knew about this, then his request should not be something as simple as protecting the sect. There must be other mysteries. After thinking about it, he said, fellow Taoist is also from my Xianmen. It is also fate that we can meet in the outer world. If there is anything, you can say it clearly. If it is not too difficult, I can help you. Old ancestor Jing Tsang cupped his hands and said, then, Daoren, I will speak frankly. The Donghua sects met in PG Palace, and Daoren has already heard of the outcome. Now, I also wish to form an alliance with your sect. What do you think, Jinren Zhang? Zhang Yan could not help but look at him, thinking that this old ancestor Jing Tsang was really good at scheming. The other party could be considered Patriarch Penyuan. If the two sects formed an alliance, then as an ally, Qinsang School would naturally have to take care of its ally. This way, it would easily solve the problem of its rear. However, he did not mind. For the other party to propose such a condition, it was obvious that he thought he could help Qinsang School elsewhere. He said, Penyuan is only a small sect, with Yuanying as its sect leader. As for my Qinsang School, it has been passed down for tens of thousands of years and has 13 paradises. Comparing the two, the difference is like heaven and earth. Yet, fellow Taoist wishes to discuss business with us. What is it that you are relying on? Old ancestor Jing Tsang said, although I am only a fragment of my soul, I know everything that my original body knows. I am also clear about the method of leaving the realm. If Jinren is interested, you can give it all to me. Zhang Yan raised his eyebrows. The other party did not mention Qinsang School but only himself. It was obvious that this condition was only used in exchange for him nodding his head. In Qinsang School, there were several Jinren who had ascended. As the hall master of Duzhen Hall, he was also qualified to read the secret Taoist books left behind by them. Speaking of which, he did not lack this kind of method. However, this Jing Tsang Daoren was actually able to cultivate to the stage of ascension from the body of a rogue cultivator. Even if he had borrowed the pill jade left behind by the predecessor's small realm, it was still very extraordinary. Naturally, he could use his lifetime's gains as a reference. He nodded and said, even if I am willing, I still need to convince Jinren's sect leader. Old ancestor Jing Tsang stretched out 3 fingers and said, according to what Daoren knows, in this world, not counting the people who have occupied it, there are still 3 small realms left in the world. I am willing to give them all to your noble sect. Zhang Yan uttered an, oh, and was slightly tempted. The small realms left behind by the predecessors most likely contained pill jade. Putting aside this item, it was also a good paradise. If they really had 3 realms in their hands, it was needless to say the benefits to the sect. He nodded and said, Taoist friend, with these 3 small realms, it is not difficult for I to convince the sect to make an alliance. Other than that, I wonder if fellow friend has any other requests. Old ancestor Jing Tsang bowed and said, there is indeed one thing. Daoren, I am only an imprisoned spirit. I am unable to cultivate myself. Even if Penyuan's sect can continue to pass on for another 10,000 years, what can I do? I will still be trapped in this place and cannot be as free as a demon. However, if I can merge with the heavenly palace and truly become the true spirit of this hall, I will not be restrained and can even help your noble sect at a critical moment. Zhang Yan looked at him meaningfully. It was not rare to see this. This was the other party's true request. However, compared to the previous conditions, he had already taken advantage of this place. Moreover, he could feel that the other party still had some secrets that he had not revealed. If he could help with this matter, there was no harm in agreeing to it. He said, how can I help fellow friend? Old ancestor Jing Tsang bowed and said, to solve this predicament, you must purify yourself and eliminate the obsession and delusion in your soul. I will have to trouble fellow friend for this. After listening to his explanation, Zhang Yan realized that for thousands of years, because of the spiritual communication with the disciples of Pingyuan sect, he had obtained benefits and could exist in the world for a long time. However, at the same time, when he sensed the various kinds of obsession and delusion, he was also infected and was not as pure as before. The more this was so, the more he could not merge with the true treasure. This was like his own body was originally a clear and still pond. Every time there was a disciple's spiritual resonance, there would be waves and mud mixed in. Over time, it would become a pool of muddy water. And among them, the biggest obsession was actually towards that Taihao school. Because of a story, Pingyuan's sect was extremely at odds with it. If the disciples of both sides met outside the mountain, they would definitely fight. Because the heavenly palace's strong baleful qi restrained the opponent, every time they faced an enemy, they would use their spirit to communicate with the heavenly palace, causing this obsession to become even deeper. Old ancestor Jing Tsang sighed and said, "May fellow friend open the eyes of Pingyuan's sect and quell this resentment. If you can do this, I can undo some of the shackles." Zhang Yan thought for a moment and said with a smile, "This kind of matter between the younger generation is not difficult to solve. I can just go back and make some arrangements. However, from what fellow friend said, you are still very far from liberation. I guess there is still a great obsession and delusion in your body. I wonder if you can tell me. If it is convenient, I can help fellow friend get rid of it." Old ancestor Jing Tsang was silent for a while. In the end, he said apologetically, "Thank you for your kindness, but there are some things that I can't say clearly. I can only tell fellow friend that it won't be a betrayal of the alliance. Also, when the tribulation opens, it will be the day of liberation." Zhang Yan nodded slightly. In reality, he had already guessed it, but since the other party was not willing to say it clearly, he did not pursue it to the end. He said, "This time, I have been out for a long time. If there is nothing else, I will have to take my leave. When I come back next time, I can sign a letter with fellow friend to establish the alliance." Old ancestor Jing Tsang hurriedly said, "I dare not delay fellow friend." He waved his hand and took out a gourd from inside the palace. He said, "Just now, I saw fellow friend gathering outer sky Polaris sand. I also have a lot here, but they are refined from the outer sky poison fire fierce qi over these thousands of years. I am trapped here and have no use for it, so I will give it to fellow friend." Zhang Yan did not stand on ceremony. After thanking him, he shook his sleeve and took it. At this time, old ancestor Jing Tsang said, "Last year, I saw a demon spirit using a tool to escape into the void. This matter might be useful to Jinren." Zhang Yan's thoughts turned, and he immediately knew who he was talking about. He bowed and said, "Thank you for telling me." Then, he turned around and left the hall. With a leap, he turned into a majestic beam of clear light and landed directly in the direction of Donghua continent. Old ancestor Jing Tsang watched him leave and looked in the direction of South Cliff continent. There was hatred in the bottom of his eyes. He thought to himself, "Lingya old man, you caused me and my disciple to lose our sect. Back then, my original body couldn't do anything to you. Now that the tribulation has come, I will definitely make you, Yu Xiao, suffer." R1152. Chapter 1033. Zhou Ruiying was holding a letter in her hand. Her heart was abnormally agitated. With a glare, the letter immediately turned into a pile of ashes. She then waved her sleeves at the disciple standing opposite her and shouted, "All of you, go down." The disciple felt like he was pardoned and bowed before hurriedly retreating. Zhou Ruiying slammed the table and said resentfully, "Why do I have to deal with this again?" At this moment, the dressing table in the distance lit up and a blurry figure appeared in the mirror. The person smiled, "What is troubling junior sister?" Zhou Ruiying did not turn around and sighed. Qinsang School sent an envoy to Lishan sect a few days ago. It was said that they were willing to help Yuling's disciple with all their might. The alliance between the two is imminent. And the order from the sect is for me to think of a way to stop this. The figure was shocked and said solemnly, "Did Yuling Jinren agree?" Zhou Ruiying snorted and said, Yuling Jinren did not say anything, but it is only a matter of time. The figure felt much more relaxed when he heard this and said, as long as there is no agreement, there is still something to do. Yuling Jinren's mana is great, and if he stands on Qinsang School's side, it will be disadvantageous to me in the future. Looking at the big picture, Yu Xiao's current position was still above Qinsang School's. But if the other side had a cultivator who was close to ascension, this advantage would be wiped out immediately. Zhou Ruiying was annoyed. This matter should have been reported to me earlier and I could have taken precautions. But they waited until it happened to find me. They are obviously watching. I am easy to bully and want to see me make a fool of myself. Actually, this time, Yu Xiao's response was a beat slower. At Peachy Palace, Yuling Jinren did not support Qinsang School and made Yu Xiao mistakenly think that even if he was not on her side, she would still maintain a neutral stance. But who would have thought that she would turn around and get close to Qinsang School? So she could not react in time. The silhouette smiled and said, Junior Martial Sister has failed a few times in the past, and all the fellow disciples have some complaints. Who knows, this might be an opportunity to make a contribution. Perhaps these words were effective. Zhou Ruiying turned his head around and sighed. I don't have any ideas now. Senior brother, what do you think I should do? The figure said, there are 3 ways right now. First, think of a way to rope Li Shan over to our side. This way, my offer will definitely be higher than Qinsang's. Zhou Ruiying sneered, if I were Yuling, I would secretly leak this matter to Qinsang School. It wouldn't be hard to get more benefits. The shadow said, this is where the difficulty lies. When Yuling Jinren ascended to the throne in the early years, because he misinterpreted my, Yu Xiao's, good intention, he had a grudge in his heart and wanted to resolve it here. It's not easy, and it's even more difficult in such a rush. Zhou Ruiying frowned and asked, then what's the second strategy? The shadow said solemnly, the spies we set up in Fengling Ocean can make their move. If they ruin the friendship between the 2 sects, they can also obstruct this matter. Zhou Ruiying sneered, Senior brother, are you talking about those demonic cultivators of North Ocean? They haven't done anything for a long time, so there's no hope. However, I can go get a book and urge them. Senior brother, why don't you talk about the third strategy? The shadow said solemnly, the third strategy is to think of a way to send Yuling away from this world. Zhou Ruiying was stunned. She thought carefully and pondered, this method is somewhat possible. It can help him ascend, and it will definitely require Essence Furnace Pill Jade. However, I don't have it in my hands, so how can I do this? The shadow said, this is a major matter of the sect, you can discuss it with your fellow disciples. If no one agrees, then it won't be your fault. You can report it to Lord. Zhou Ruiying's eyes lit up, and she said, Senior brother's words make sense. If this matter were to succeed, she wouldn't be the only one making the decision. In the future, if someone were to make a fuss about it, it wouldn't be her alone. However, if her fellow disciples rejected her, she could naturally use this as an excuse to escape. She stood up from her seat and said, I'll go to the hall to sound the chime and invite everyone to come and discuss this matter. Senior brother, you have to help me when the time comes. The shadow smiled and nodded, that's for sure. However, before Zhou Ruiying could leave, a streak of starlight flew over from outside. Her expression tensed up, and she took it over to take a look. Her mood became even worse, and she said hatefully, he's just a backdoor disciple, and he actually dares to bully my Yu Xiao sect. The shadow asked, what happened now? Zhou Ruiying said, Tao Zhenhong, who was originally hiding in the East Sea, is now heading to the Fengling Ocean. According to the letter, he moved Clear Feather sect along with him. How despicable. The shadow pondered for a moment, and said, I heard that Tao Zhenhong and Zhang Yan are close friends, and this must be the Qinsang School's plan. Junior sister, you definitely can't underestimate it. Zhou Ruiying said in frustration, so what? Do I have to kill my way to his door to stop him? The shadow was speechless. It would be fine if the people from Dongtian's sect were to fight on the Fengling Ocean, but if they were to get close to the South Cliff continent, it would be a disaster unless they used the Spirit Cliff to suppress the continent. However, this treasure was not so easily moved. After a while, he said, if it really doesn't work, we can invite him out to fight and force him to leave this place. Zhou Ruiying held her forehead, and said angrily, this matter will most likely fall into my hands, but I don't have the time now. We'll talk about it when I'm back. She called in a maid, and gave her a few instructions before leaving the residence. She stepped on a colorful cloud, and headed for the main hall. On a nameless island in the Fengling Ocean, Zhang Nei Shi arrived on a cloud alone. He looked behind him, and took out 3 feathers in his hand, and flicked them out lightly. After a moment, seeing that there was no movement around, he descended from the sky with a peace of mind. He then took out a black pellet from his sleeve, and threw it into the water. After waiting for an hour, a demonic fish suddenly leaped out of the water, and spat out a letter from its stomach. It then fell back into the sea, and in the blink of an eye, drifted away with the waves. Zhang Nei Shi reached out to take the letter, and when he opened it, his face became gloomy. This letter wanted him to act quickly. Even if he couldn't kill Li Xiumi within these few days, he had to get rid of 1 or 2 Mount Li disciples to destroy the harmony between the 2 families. It was just that after he came with the identity of a demon envoy, he was not trusted in the Temple of Delay. Usually, there would be people following behind him, so under such circumstances, how could he do such a thing? Even this time, he still found an opportunity to slip out. Just as he thought of this, he suddenly realized, and thought, something's wrong. Just now, he only cared about coming out to receive the letter, and didn't have time to worry about other things. Now that he thought about it, there were clearly fewer enemies on the island today, and that was why the security was not tight. He pondered for a long time, and felt that there must be something happening in the sect. Maybe Li Xiumi left the island, and that was why there were fewer people. If that was the case, then it was the best time to act. If he missed it, he didn't know when he would have to wait for the next time. Originally, he still had to investigate this matter, or at least find out the details. However, Yu Xiao was pressing him so hard, where would he find the time to do so? He could only rely on the information he heard daily, and try to break through. As for whether he would succeed, it would depend on his own luck. He gritted his teeth, took out a large conch, and blew a few times. Even so, there was no sound of death. Not long after, a huge wave suddenly rose on the sea, and then he saw 2 black dragons break out of the water with a rumble, and came to midair. With a spin, they turned into 2 tall and strong demon generals, fully armored, and each holding a long hammer in their hands. They came in front of him, and cupped their fists in greeting, saying, "Greetings, great attendant." Zhang Nei Shi also hadn't seen the 2 for a long time, and nodded to them, saying, "The 2 generals also know that I am under the orders of the king to come here and ruin the rebellious matter. For this, I am willing to sacrifice myself to help the traitors. Today, the opportunity has come, and I have decided to act. In a while, I will have to rely on the 2 of you." At the end of his words, he bowed. The 2 demon generals said loudly, "We are willing to listen to great attendant's orders." Zhang Nei Shi secretly took out a talisman, and shown it at the 2. Seeing that there was nothing strange, it was obvious that during the time they were separated, they didn't fall into other people's plans. He made up his mind, and waved his hand, saying, "Then I will have to trouble the 2 of you, hide in my sleeve first." The 2 demon generals immediately shook their bodies, and turned into 2 small dragons, entering his sleeve. Zhang Nei Shi raised his hand to cover his sleeve, and his head shrank back. He carefully looked left and right, and then rode the wind and clouds, and turned back. After traveling for hundreds of miles to the south, he landed on a heavily guarded rocky island. This place didn't allow flying, so he could only walk, and walk towards the door of the small jie. When he reached the door, someone immediately came up to ask questions, and after a few words, he was let in. After Li Xiumi established the sect, he set up a mountain gate at the original small jie. Normal disciples could only cultivate outside the island, and only a few disciples with decent aptitude could enter. As for the disciples of Mount Li, or the Jadine disciples that Wei Zihong transferred over to listen to orders, they all cultivated in the small Jie. However, as a demon envoy, he had the right to enter and leave in name. Usually, when he came and went, there would always be people watching, but today, no one paid attention to him, so he knew that his guess was not wrong. When he entered the small Jie, he looked towards a mountain peak hidden in the fog. Previously, he had seen a female disciple of Mount Li go in and out of the peak a few times, so she must have been cultivating there. If she was still there, as long as he killed her, he would be able to answer to Yu Xiao. At this moment, the surroundings were empty, and seeing that no one was paying attention to him, he laughed softly, and with a leap, he flew in that direction. At the same time, on the Fengling Ocean, Li Xiumi, Wei Zihong, Fang Rujia, and Chan Palace Lord Shaoshan were all standing on a cloud raft. Because they knew that Tao Zhenhong would come today, they all came out to greet him, but to guard against a sneak attack from Yu Xiao disciples, they still stayed within the Sea Jie. And Shaoshan was holding a mirror in her hand, and her eyes were fixed on it. The person reflected in the mirror was actually Tsang Nei Shi. At this moment, his every move fell into everyone's eyes. Fang Rujia's beautiful eyes floated over, and she said, "Sect Master Li going out has given the rascals a chance." Wei Zihong said coldly, "If not, how can we draw them out?" Li Xiumi nodded, and just as she was about to speak, she suddenly felt something, and looked into the distance, and said, "Tao Zhenren should have arrived." Wei Zihong and Fang Rujia looked over, and at first, they didn't see any movement, but after 5 or 6 breaths, they saw that the fierce wind barrier on the Fengling Ocean suddenly stopped, and like a curtain, it actually opened outwards, and they saw a green wand flying over, and on it sat a handsome young Taoist, who was nodding to the crowd. Li Xiumi and the rest hurriedly went forward to greet, and then said, "With Zhenren here to hold the fort, I can finally cultivate without worry." Tao Zhenren said with a smile, "I will just take a step first. In a few days, there will be another Taoist who will come, at that time, there will be no worries here." Chapter 1034. Attendant Sung quickly arrived at the summit of the mountain. He saw that a large platform had been cleaned up by someone using manna. It was clean and spotless. The grass and leaves that floated here were swept away by a gentle breeze. Behind him was a small path. Under the shade of a few old pine trees, a waterfall could be vaguely seen. The shadows of the waterfall were pink and green. If one listened carefully, he could even hear the faint singing coming from inside. He was delighted. He knew that he had found the right person this time. The Li Mountain disciple had not left. Just as he was about to enter, he only took a few steps when he encountered a gentle force that pushed him out. He was shocked. He did not expect the other party to be so vigilant and actually set up a restrictive formation here. In reality, because the Li Mountain disciples were weak, they placed more importance on protective formations. It had been like this since the beginning of cultivation. It had long become a habit for them. No matter where they went, they would never lose their vigilance. The owner of the room seemed to have sensed the commotion outside and the singing stopped. After a while, a pleasant voice said, "Which guest has arrived?" Attendant Sung's thoughts turned quickly. Now that things had come to this, he could only find an excuse of a visitor. He said loudly, "I am Tsang Shou. I am under the orders of Sect Master Li to report something to Taoist friend." The Li Mountain disciple paused before saying, "Sir, please wait a moment." After a while, Attendant Sung felt that the restrictive formation had disappeared. He could not help but rejoice that he did not expose himself. However, after suffering once, he did not dare to be rash again. Who knew if there were other arrangements in the room, so he still stood in front of the door without moving. The sound of clothes fluttering could be heard. A graceful and light female cultivator of about 17 or 18 years of age walked out from the bend. Her name was Rong Xiaoyu. She was Fang Rujia's martial niece and also a disciple sent by the Li Mountain sect to help Yan Zhongguan. Her eyes were bright. After looking at Attendant Sung for a few years, she recognized that he was a demon. However, Li Xiumi's family was also of the water race. It was not strange that Yan Zhongguan was mostly a demon cultivator. However, she was shocked at the other's cultivation. It was much higher than her own. She didn't step forward and only bowed from afar. May I ask what message sect leader Li has for me? Eunuch Tsang saw that the position she was standing in was very clever. It was just one step away from the cave and she didn't let her guard down because of the identity he mentioned. He couldn't help but curse in his heart and said, under the order of the sect leader, I'm here to give you 2 mounts. Rong Xiaoyu was confused and asked, why are you giving me a mount all of a sudden? The attendant said, the upper sect sent a letter the day before yesterday. He wanted my disciple to be careful when he went out, so he sent several flood dragons here. Firstly, they serve as leg strength, and secondly, they serve as bodyguards. Fellow Daoist Fang and the others have already received them, and it just so happens that there are a few extra. He wanted me to deliver them to fellow Daoist, who will accept them. I still have to go somewhere else. Rong Xiaoyu's interest was piqued. She asked eagerly, where is the mount? Let me have a look. The chamberlain took a step forward. He raised his sleeves to attract the other party's attention, and said in a natural tone, right here. As soon as he finished speaking, 2 black gas flew out from his sleeves and instantly turned into 2 burly demon generals. Each of them held a long hammer and smashed it down. Rong Xiaoyu was also startled. She quickly retreated, but the chamberlain was determined to get what he wanted. How could he allow her to hide in the cave? He reached out his hand and grabbed. Strong winds danced in all directions and blocked her body. But at this moment, she smiled slyly. Suddenly, countless colorful petals flew out from her body and turned into layers of soft light. The 2 long hammers were held up above her, and no matter how hard she tried, they couldn't fall down. With a light tap of her feet, she turned into a conveyance light and floated into the depths of the cave. The chamberlain was shocked. The divine weapon in his hand was taken from the vault. Why couldn't it even break a defensive magic treasure on him? But he didn't have time to care about this now. He hurriedly said, don't let her go. The 2 demon generals followed without hesitation. However, when they turned the corner, they were both startled. They saw a faint crimson blood mist flying in front of them. Upon closer inspection, they found that there were actually countless tiny strange insects within it. The path was narrow, and the 2 of them were tall, so it was too late to dodge. Relying on his thick skin and abundant primordial qi, he circulated his xian qi to protect his body. He waved his hammer back and forth in front of him and rushed straight in. The insects swarmed up, and in the blink of an eye, the 2 demons were covered with stings. They didn't care at first, but after a few feet, they found it difficult to move. The qi of blood in their body was like a broken dam, pouring out. Only then did they realize the danger and hurriedly protected their primordial qi. But it was too late. After a few breaths, they fell to the ground, and the long hammers in their hands also fell. The chamberlain followed closely behind. He was just a chamberlain. Even though his cultivation was not weak, if he relied on a lot of external medicine, he wouldn't be able to fight. Seeing this scene, he was scared out of his wits. He turned around and wanted to escape, but how could he be faster than the swarm of insects? In a flash, he was caught up and wrapped up. His limbs were cut off, leaving behind a broken body that fell from the sky. At this moment, a glazed blood insect leaped out from among the thousands of strange insects. There was a dark red line on its back, and the membranous wings on its back fluttered rapidly. It looked extremely ferocious. He stared at the attendant for a moment, then curled his body into a ball and transformed into a pale-faced young man. He took out a talisman and placed it on the young man's head. Then, he threw out a sack and put the young man inside. He patted the sack with a satisfied look on his face. Rong Xiaoyu saw the ferocious appearance of the chamberlain and was afraid. She hesitated for a while but still didn't come over. She bowed from afar and said, "Thank you for your help, brother." Zhang Chan snorted and waved at her. He glanced at the two long hammers on the ground and thought to himself, it's a pity for these two. They are Jiao dragons in human form, which is rare in this world. However, it seems like they have never fought with anyone before. They are reckless and unintelligent. They only have brute force, but they don't know how to use it. However, this is a good thing for me. These two are already a great supplement. I wonder what the Demon Lord, Ji Wang, feels like. Donglai Continent, Great Joy Dynasty, Dingbian County. At the foot of the thousandly drawing Bao Mountain, an army of more than 30,000 people was attacking a city from 3 sides. This city was built with the back of a mountain and was built with thick stones. The guards on the city walls were actually all monsters. Although they were ferocious, the soldiers who climbed up the ladders were not afraid of death, especially the few at the front. They were tall and strong and had the strength to subdue a lion and fight a tiger. Under their attack, the city wall was in danger and could fall at any time. At this moment, a demon eagle suddenly flew out of the city. With a flap of its wings, a strong gust of wind swept up and the soldiers near the city wall were all swept up into the sky. After flying 1 round, it actually swept up an empty space. Then, it retracted its wings and landed on the flagpole of the city wall. It turned into a white-robed man wearing a tall hat and a large robe. He looked at the army formation that was covered with flags below the city wall with a hint of disdain in his eyes. The commander of the army stared at the man with one hand tightly grasping the sword at his waist. His face was a little gloomy. A horse came from afar and a guard came down. He flipped down from the horse and half knelt on the ground. He panted and said, "General, the commander said that the demon general is powerful. My troops have suffered heavy losses and it will be difficult to attack the city again." The general frowned and went forward to discuss. He whispered in the ear, "General, it is already late and the soldiers are tired. Why don't we attack tomorrow?" The general thought for a while and nodded. He waved the flag behind him and the sound of the gong sounded. All the soldiers retreated like the tide. The white-clothed man transformed into an eagle again and hovered in the air. However, when he saw the hundreds and thousands of crossbows pointing towards the sky, the arrowheads glowing with a scarlet light, and the retreating army was also orderly, the white-clothed man did not dare to rush down. He let out a cry as if to demonstrate his power and flew back. The general snorted and said, "Since I followed His Majesty to conquer the demons 10 years ago, it has been a long time since I have seen such a powerful demon that can cultivate into a human form." The general said, "I can go to the county and ask the Taoist priest from Xian Guan to come here and subdue the demon." The general thought for a while and shook his head, "I am afraid they will not be able to subdue the demon, unless," as he was speaking, he suddenly heard a commotion behind him. He was strict with his troops and when he saw this scene, he could not help but be angry and said, "Who is causing trouble in my army?" A soldier excitedly rode over and said loudly, "General, Taoist Master Yuan is here." "Taoist Master Yuan?" The general was startled and then remembered something. His face lit up and his body shook. He looked around and said, "Quickly invite him in." Not long after, a young Taoist in his 20s came over. He wore a black Taoist robe and looked very serious. His eyes were cold and emotionless. When he came over, all the soldiers had respectful expressions on their faces. They opened up a path for him to pass through. The Taoist did not look around and came to the front of the general. He cupped his hands and said, "General Li, His Majesty heard that Lianshi city has been attacked for a long time without success and specially ordered me to help. Therefore, I flew here in the middle of the night. I wonder if General needs my help." Although the general was a relative of the Li family, he did not dare to be rude to him. Not only was the other party a disciple of Shengda's celestial master, but he was also the son of the late Grand Military Officer Yuan. No matter which identity he had, he could not afford to offend him. Not to mention that he was carrying an imperial order. He hurriedly said, "I dare not. Taoist Master has come at the right time. There is an eagle demon on the city wall that is obstructing our army." Yuan Jianqing took a few glances and suddenly a mysterious light appeared under his feet. He soared into the sky and flew straight to the stone city. When the soldiers behind saw that he actually flew into the sky, they were all excited. They raised their weapons and shouted loudly, their voices shaking the wilderness. When the man in white saw a ray of light coming over, his face immediately changed. He screamed and changed back to his original form. With a long roar, he rushed up. Yuan Jingqing didn't even bother to look at it. A flying shuttle suddenly flew out of his sleeve, and wherever it passed, it was cut into two. Then, the mysterious light behind him grew longer, and with a sweep, a cloud of rubble and dust flew into the air with a loud boom. When the dust dispersed, the soldiers finally saw clearly that the stone city had a gap of more than 10 feet long. The dozens of demons standing on it also disappeared without a trace. Seeing such power, General Li was also dumbfounded. He knew that this Taoist master Yuan's mana was strong, but with such power, even if there were more than 10,000 soldiers here, they would not be a match. However, this was a good opportunity to attack the city. He calmed himself down, pulled out his sword and pointed it forward. He shouted, "Soldiers, seize the city." Following his order, the flags swayed and the drums thundered. More than 10,000 soldiers behind him shouted and rushed in the direction of the city. Yuan Jingqing silently watched this scene. This was already the last demon city in Donglai continent. After dozens of expeditions, Lu Chao had once again pacified the chaos of the demons. For the next few decades, there would be no more wars. At this point, it was time for him to leave this place and search for the next step of cultivation. R1292. Chapter 1035. On the coast of the East Sea in the Donghua continent, a beam of light came from the east and landed on the land, startling a large flock of birds. The fireworks-like light flashed for a moment before slowly dissipating. Yuan Jingqing walked out from within. So this is the Donghua continent. He looked around. Under the moonlight, the distant seawater glowed with silver light. The sound of the waves crashing could be heard clearly, and the silhouettes of many mountains could be seen in the distance. When he was in the Donglai continent, he obtained the Xian seed left behind by Zhang Yan in the Qinghe monastery and used it to cultivate into the mystic light realm. Now, he was already at the 3rd level. However, because he could not find the external elixir recorded in the Taoist book, he had to come to this continent if he wanted to travel further. He stopped where he was and breathed in and out. He felt that the spiritual opportunity was steaming and extremely strong, much stronger than the weak qi in Donglai. In just a few breaths, he felt his whole body relaxed and wanted to roar. It made him want to immediately sit down and cultivate. However, he resisted in the end. Although Zhang Yan only left a few words about the Donghua continent, he understood that this place was not like Donglai. Not only were the demons more powerful, but there were also devil doctrine cultivators with strange and unpredictable methods. His cultivation was actually nothing. Just now, if someone noticed the commotion when he landed, they would most likely come to check. It was better for him to leave this place first. He decided not to go deep into the continent. Instead, he went in the opposite direction and headed toward the sea. Firstly, there were few cultivators on the sea, and there was no devil doctrine there. Secondly, even if someone came, they would not expect him to do this. He immediately leaped up, but he did not create a conveyance light. Instead, he created a breeze and flew away like a bird. After about 1,000 miles, he saw an uninhabited island. He landed and rode on the conveyance light. Not long after, he carved out a spacious cave on a rock wall. He slowly walked in and sat down cross-legged, preparing to cultivate for a period of time. Then, he would go out and find the cultivators here to understand the situation in the continent. Then, he would head north to Qinsong to find the way. After cultivating here for 5 days, he finally came out of meditation. At this moment, he felt full of energy and qi. It was also extremely comfortable. It was obvious that this place was filled with spiritual opportunity. After putting away the technique, he walked out of the cave. However, as soon as he stepped outside, his expression turned serious. About 1,000 feet away, there was a flying boat with a man and a woman standing on it. The man had a refined appearance and was dressed in a dark purple robe. The woman was dressed in a white muslin and had an alluring appearance. However, the astral winds that were swirling around the two seemed to be stirring up the island at any time. However, the two of them didn't seem to have any enmity. The man stepped forward slightly. Smiling kindly at him, he cupped his hands and said, "Are you junior brother Yuan Jianqing?" When Yuan Jianqing heard him calling his name, his expression changed slightly. He raised his hand and saluted, "Yes, I am. May I know who you are?" The cultivator said with a smile, "I'm your fifth martial brother, Jiang Zheng. My teacher sensed that you used a talisman to come to the Donghua continent, so he sent a message." He then pointed at the female cultivator beside him. "This is your martial sister-in-law, Dan Huizhen." Dan Huizhen smiled. She bowed on the cloud. Yuan Jianqing immediately saluted and said solemnly, "So it's senior brother and martial sister-in-law. Please accept my bow." His father, Qin Yuanzhenping, was a military officer of the royal court. Although he entered Taoism, he couldn't stay away from the world. The people he befriended were either the children of officials or members of the royal family. He had a noble air about him. Facing his senior brother and martial sister-in-law whose cultivation level was far higher than his, he was neither servile nor overbearing. Jiang Zheng nodded subconsciously. Yuan Jianqing asked, "Senior brother, how did you find me?" Jiang Zheng said, "Pengyuan sect, where Huizhen is from, is the master of the sea realm here. To guard against the cultivators of the demonic sect, there is a water tribe monitoring the sea area, so it wasn't difficult to find you." Yuan Jianqing thought for a while and said, "Senior brother knew I was here 5 days ago." Dan Huizhen smiled and said, "Your senior brother found me then. Seeing that you were meditating, I didn't disturb you and stayed here to protect you for 5 days." Yuan Jianqing was moved. He bowed and said, "Thank you for waiting for me, senior brother and martial sister-in-law. It's my fault." Jiang Zheng shook his head and said, "We are all disciples of the teacher, so we should take care of each other. Junior brother, you don't have to be so polite." He thought about his words and said, "Junior brother Yuan, this is your first time in the East continent, so you might not know the current situation. Now that the demonic and mystic sects have stopped fighting, the world is temporarily at peace, but there are still many enemies in the sect. If you cultivate outside in the future, you must be careful. It's best to take precautions." Yuan Jianqing said seriously, "I understand." Jiang Zheng smiled and said, "This is not a good place to talk. I have already arranged a banquet in the sect to welcome you. Junior brother, are you willing to come?" Yuan Jianqing happily agreed. He had just arrived in Donghua, and there were many things he did not know. It was a good opportunity to find out more. Jiang Zheng and his wife invited him onto the flying boat, and the three of them returned to the sect. When they arrived at Pengyuan sect, the two of them arranged a banquet and treated them well. During the banquet, the two of them answered all the questions that Yuan Jianqing asked. After the banquet, Yuan Jianqing already had a general understanding of the situation in the sect and the Donghua continent. After the banquet, Jiang Zheng called Yuan Jianqing over and said, "Junior brother Yuan, master wants you to stay at my place for a period of time. After you form your elixir, you can go to the sect to cultivate. What do you think, junior brother?" Yuan Jianqing thought for a while and said, "I heard senior brother say just now, if the disciples of the Qinsang sect encounter elixir formation, they need to go out and search for external medicine to train their Taoist hearts." Jiang Zheng looked at him and said, "Junior brother, do you also want to take this path?" Yuan Jianqing nodded. Jiang Zheng patted his shoulder and said, "Since you have made up your mind, I will stop you. However, the continent is different from the past. Other than the demonic cultivators, Yu Xiao and the other sects are not on good terms with me. You cannot be careless." Yuan Jianqing said, "I am just a Xian light realm cultivator, and no one in the sect knows where I come from. If I am careful, I will be fine." Jiang Zheng said with a smile, "You're right, but there's no need to be too cautious. If you encounter a person that bullies the weak and you can't resist, you can speak of your origins. There aren't many people in the world that would dare make a move against the disciples of Master. When Yuan Jingqing heard this just now, it was not hard for him to imagine how powerful his master was, and he couldn't help but feel a little excited. Jiang Zheng said, "Since you are going to travel outside, you must have something to protect yourself. You can tell me what you need." Yuan Jingqing thought for a while and said, "May I ask senior brother if there is a furnace in Pingyuan sect?" Jiang Zheng said, "Of course there is." He took out a jade talisman and placed it in Yuan Jingqing's hand. He said, "If junior brother needs it, just use this talisman and someone will guide you to this place. As for the materials you need, just tell them and someone will prepare them for you." Yuan Jingqing thanked him and took it. He cultivated the Primal Day Divine Cave Spirit Scripture, of the 5 techniques and 3 scriptures. However, the flying shuttle he was using now was made by him using the essence of metal and stone as recorded in the scripture. This was not easy. Even the furnace was made by thousands of people. Just now, there were 9 of them, but the day they were completed, the furnace collapsed and only one was left in his hand. There were many techniques in the scripture that required several spirit shuttles to be used. Since he was already here, he had to make a few more so that he could face his enemies when he went out. For the next few days, Jiang Zheng hid in the furnace and made the spirit shuttles. It took him 6 months and just now, he made 6 spirit shuttles. He focused on seeking Tao and when the treasure was completed, he went to Jiang Zheng and his wife to bid farewell. Jiang Zheng took out a 2-feet-long jade box and said, "Junior brother, since you are going out to travel, as your senior brother, I don't have anything good to give you. There is a set of formation flags here. If it is inconvenient to use it in the wilderness, you can place it around the cave to defend against enemies." Yuan Jingqing took it and cupped his hands together. "Thank you, senior brother, I am ashamed to accept it." Dan Huizhen smiled, "Junior brother, you can't travel without treasures. As your senior sister-in-law, I will also give you a treasure." She took out a pearl the size of a goose egg from her pouch. It shone brightly and one could tell that it was not an ordinary item. Yuan Jingqing looked at it. Seeing Jiang Zheng nodding at him, he knew that the 2 of them meant well, so he accepted it. Then, he bowed deeply to the 2 of them and flew away, quickly disappearing into the horizon. Dan Huizhen rebuked, "How can you be so disrespectful to junior martial brother Yuan? We've only been here for a few days and haven't even spoken much to each other before you send him away. Has he offended you in any way?" Jiang Zheng laughed, "How can there be such a thing? I see that this junior brother is a very opinionated person. If I make decisions for him, it will not be good." He had been in the mortal world for many years. Just by looking at Yuan Jingqing's expression and behavior, he knew that although this junior brother talked and laughed harmoniously with others on the surface, he was actually proud and aloof inside. This kind of person did not like others to make arrangements for him. However, Dan Huizhen shook her head and secretly made up her mind to take care of him more. Although Yuan Jingqing's cultivation was not high, he was still Zhang Yan's disciple after all. Who would dare to look down on him? If he went back and said that Pingyuan sect did not take good care of him, in order to avoid hurting the friendship between them, he naturally would not say anything. In the end, the blame would most likely fall on her. At this moment, a disciple came to report, "Sect leader, spiritual master Jiang, someone from Taihao school came to report that they have agreed to find Zhang Shan next month to fight." Dan Huizhen waved her hand and said, "Got it, you can leave now." Jiang Zheng said in a deep voice, "Taihao school did not reject. If this matter goes smoothly, your Pingyuan sect's old mountain gate can be taken back." Pingyuan sect's mountain gate was originally on land, but under the invasion of Taihao school, they had no choice but to move to the sea. Even so, because they were afraid of the sect's cultivation technique, they still frequently used methods in the dark to suppress them. Until Pingyuan sect had the support of Zhaoyu sect behind them, both sides were stable. However, after a while, they had become enemies. The day before yesterday, Jiang Zheng received Zhang Yan's instructions to think of a way to take back Pingyuan sect's old mountain gate, which was why they issued the challenge letter. Dan Huizhen said with some worry, if Taihao School does not follow the rules, the person who will fight will most likely be a third-stage realm cultivator. Does husband really have the confidence to win against him? Jiang Jing said, if I don't do this, how can I lure him to fight? Wife can rest assured, your husband's communication with the Sky Palace has become smoother and smoother. It is no longer comparable to the past. With the treasures bestowed by my benefactor, I am not afraid of the heaven and earth seal.